Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers. Chapter 108 Borrowing a Knife to Kill. Chapter 108 Borrowing a Knife to Kill. A pleasant springtime always passes quickly, and in the blink of an eye, the summer heat arrived. Lu Zhu bought big blocks of ice from outside and placed them in the courtyard. The Empress Dowager had bestowed a considerable amount of money on her, so even though ice was expensive, Zhang Ruan did not lack for anything. Lu Zhu served her the iced lotus leaf and lotus seed congee. Zhang Ruan tried a mouthful. It was deliciously clear and sweet, and delightfully refreshing, truly a taste of summer. Although the ornamental bamboo planted in the western corner of the courtyard was not abundant, the patch of verdant green was sufficiently beautiful. Thus, although it was blazing hot outside, it was comfortably cool within Ruanju. As Lu Zhu was greedy for the coolness, she monopolized all of the embroidery work to be done within the residence, but Zhang Ruan did not call her out on it. Meanwhile, Tianzhu was like a decorative item, merely sitting at one side watching as Lu Zhu embroidered a handkerchief. Truthfully, it was not that Tianzhu's embroidery skills were unremarkable. On the contrary, if one took her embroidery and presented it as being the skilled work of one of the capital's most renowned embroiderers, the assertion would not be doubted. In fact, her skill was so outstanding that people would ironically view it with suspicion. Although the clothes Zhang Ruan wore daily were vibrant in color, she was not particularly concerned with what she wore, so she just allowed Tianzhu's hands to remain idle. All she had to do was to keep an ear out for information and make inquiries. While the interior was cool and refreshing, the sun outside looked as if it was growing bigger and bigger. Sometime in the afternoon, after the midday meal had been eaten and Zhang Ruan had also partaken of a bowl of ice-cold dessert, she felt a little sleepy. She was just thinking of reclining on the couch for a nap when someone arrived in the courtyard. It was old Zhang Madam's personal maidservant, Du Wan. Tianzhu asked, "Why are you here?" Du Wan smilingly replied, "Old Master's Zhang Quan's father. Former colleague came to visit Old Madam and gifted her 2 spools of Choyu silk thread. Old Madam asked this servant to bring 1 spool to eldest Mississippi. Choyu si, lit. Fish silk thread. We're assuming it's a kind of silk thread that shimmers like fish scales." Zhang Ruan asked, "Have 3rd younger sister and 4th younger sister also been given this silk?" Du Wan regarded Zhang Ruan smilingly. At present, not a single soul in the Jiangfu would dare to underestimate this eldest daughter. When the previous foreign had been alive, she had only experienced the cold shoulder from master. The status in the fu of the previous foreign and her children, eldest young master and eldest young miss, had been such that even servants had been able to abuse and insult them as they wished, believing that there was no way these 3 could ever bring about a change in their fortunes within their lifetimes. Who could have imagined that eldest young master would effect such a startling transformation, becoming a high-ranking military official in the Great Jin dynasty at present? And that eldest miss would become the Junju? Furthermore, even if she did not bear this title, the General Fu had already made their support clear, so who would dare to look down on her? Thus, one could say that a person's fate was truly wonderfully strange. She said, "No, there are only 2 spools of silk. Old Madam originally wanted to give them to Foreign, but Foreign said she was too old, and that silk embellishments look much better on the younger ladies of the Fu who are of the appropriate age. Going by status, you and 2nd Miss are undoubtedly the worthy recipients. Moreover, 3rd Miss and 4th Miss are somewhat younger." Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers. Zhang Ruan was practically unable to stop herself from laughing. Zhang Li and Zhang Dan had both come of age now, and there was very little difference in the ages of the 4 sisters. This partiality in gifting the silk thread was to show the difference between the Di and Shu daughters. Of course, this was understandable if not entirely forgivable, as it had clearly been Xia Yan who proposed it. Zhang Ruan motioned to Bai Ji to receive the Choyu silk thread, and said to Du Wan, "If this is the case, then I will have to trouble Du Wan Jia to convey my thanks to Zumu." Du Wan hurriedly laughed and said, "Eldest Miss, this servant is not worthy of such a compliment." She looked at Zhang Ruan, who was all smiles, and sighed inwardly. Generally, Zhang Ruan was not partial to putting on airs. Even after she had been conferred the title of Junju, she had never deliberately asked the servants to treat her with the courtesy required as per her status. However, all she had to do was to stand in one place and sweep her gaze lightly over the surroundings, and anyone present would feel their hearts sink. She truly had the bearing of a member of palace nobility. After exchanging a few more words with Zhang Ruan, Duan quickly took her leave. After Duan had left, Zhang Ruan asked Baiji and Lian Xiao to unroll the Choyu silk thread she had brought. The silk thread was from a region in Persia and was very rare in the Great Jin dynasty. It would not be a stretch to say that it was worth 100 taels of gold. The color of the silk thread was vibrant and bright, and sure enough, when Baiji and Lian Xiao unrolled it, Lu Zhu gasped in admiration. Each strand of silk thread was as lustrous and white as jade, seeming to exude a faint pearl-like luminescence. Just looking at it caused one to feel delight. If this thread were to be used to embroider just one flower on clothes, it would truly be the talk of the town amongst the noble ladies of the capital. Lu Zhu was already saying with great excitement, "This thread is so beautiful, why don't we let Tianju embroider a flower with it?" No, a flower is too common and gaudy, it would be a waste of such beauty, why not embroider fireflies? Tianju is so skillful, the result would definitely be delicate and lifelike. Then Tianju walked over to the Choyu silk thread and stretched out her hand to caress it. Lu Zhu called out in distress, "Be gentle. Don't damage it." She had barely finished speaking when they saw Tianju bend down and sniff lightly. Zhang Ruan observed her thoughtfully. After a moment, Tianju straightened up and once again rolled up the Choyu silk thread to place it to one side. Although she remained composed, her eyebrows were creased into a frown. After pensively watching her movements, Zhang Ruan asked, "What is the problem?" "There's nothing wrong with the Choyu silk thread itself," Tianju said, "but a spice has been applied to the surface of this spool, which acts on the silk to create a particular effect." Zhang Ruan lifted her eyebrows and said, "What is the effect?" "On smelling this spice, a pregnant woman will miscarry within 3 days. If a virgin girl were to smell this spice over a long period of time, she will not be able to conceive," Tianju stated dispassionately. "What?" Lian Xiao said in alarm. She was so angry that she almost charged at the thread to rend it to pieces. How could this happen? How could old madam send such a thing over? Tianju said, "The spice on the surface is still fresh. The thread must have been soaked with the spice over several nights and left to dry in the sun." "It wasn't Zumu but Xia Yan," Zhang Ruan said with a faint smile. Although the now pregnant Xia Yan was not able to appear in person to handle several matters, the household matters were still firmly in her control. The gift of old Zhang madam's friend had to be entered into the household accounts, and thus naturally had to pass through Xia Yan's hands. For her to take action was therefore as easy as turning over a hand. As soon as Duan had said that the silk thread had only been gifted to herself and Jiang Su, she had suspected that something fishy was going on. Xia Yan had indeed not disappointed her. What is she thinking of doing? She really has tremendous guts to dare to actually plot against Mrs. Life in the Fu. Baiji was also indignantly angry. It's possible that she was not only taking action against me alone. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly as she continued. Fifth Ying's pregnancy has just passed the 3-month mark. Hong Ying's belly was growing, and Xia Yan had long been eager to take action. However, Hong Ying had been thorough in her defenses. Her little courtyard was operating under strict precautions and everyone was continually on guard, such that not even a fly could gain entrance. Jiang Quan had also promised Hong Ying that she could use the small kitchen in her own courtyard, so for Xia Yan to move against her was harder than climbing up to the sky. However, the child in Hong Ying's belly was a constant thorn in her heart. The sons of the Jiang Fu could only come from Xia Yan's body. Xia Yan must indeed be anxious to the point of ruthlessness in order to come up with a method like this. Although Jiang Quan did not like Zhang Ruan, everyone in the Fu knew that Hong Ying and Zhang Ruan were on fairly good terms. Understandably, when compared to Xia Yan, Zhang Ruan would naturally be more inclined to help Hong Ying. Thus, although Jiang Quan was inwardly annoyed, he did not block their relationship. Hong Ying frequently visited Ruanju. This Choyu silk thread was so valuable and beautiful. A young lady of Zhang Ruan's age would surely be itching to use it on her clothes. And if she had really used the Choyu silk thread on her clothes and sat with Hong Ying for a while, Hong Ying would later suffer a miscarriage. Later, when the matter was looked into, the investigation would lead to her clothes. Xia Yan would most probably say that the Choyu silk thread had been gifted to both Jiang Su and Zhang Ruan, but there had been no problem with Jiang Su's thread, so the issue could not be with the material. Ultimately, it would have led to Zhang Ruan being accused of poisoning Fifth Ying's unborn child. a single arrow killing 2 golden eagles. Apart from getting rid of the child in Hong Ying's belly, Zhang Ruan would have attained the reputation of being sinister and vicious. Especially as the Junju, she would not be able to bear the stain of such an accusation pressed upon her. Xia Yan had indeed composed an excellent scheme, one which was worthy of great admiration. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. She had waited for so long, and this soft tortoise had finally stretched out its 4 limbs. Since Xia Yan had taken action, it only remained to be seen who would act with greater agility. Tianju pondered for a moment before asking, "Miss, should this subordinate change your silk thread with that of Jiang Susu?" Even though Tianju was now following Zhang Ruan, she seemed to be unable to rid herself of certain habits she had attained while following Xiao Xiao, such as calling herself a subordinate. "One does not kill a chicken with a sledgehammer," Zhang Ruan said as she shook her head. "There is no need for you to be called into action. Someone else will resolve this difficulty for us." Since Xia Yan intended to attack Hong Ying, how could Hong Ying not strike back? She asked Tianju, "You know about poisons?" "I have previously followed Master to deal with South Xinjiang people, so I have some knowledge. The spice that was applied to the surface is fairly common." "Excellent. Is there some way to detoxify the silk?" "I will try." Hong Ying visited Ruanju as was her usual custom. As she accepted the tea which Baiji had poured for her, she gazed at Zhang Ruan's clothes with some degree of wonder, and said, "The embroidery on your clothes is truly beautiful. The silk threads appear to be glowing." Upon Zhang Ruan's crimson, chrysanthemum-patterned skirt was clearly embroidered a snow-white Luan bird. The workmanship was exquisite, and the embroidered Luan bird looked amazingly lifelike. The silk threads gave off a faint pearlescent light, which only enhanced the impression that the bird was about to take off from the skirt in full flight. Wakan Sansai Zulan, JPG, Luan Niao, a mythical bird related to the phoenix, which was regarded as divine and auspicious in ancient times. It was so named because it originated in Luanzhou, present-day Wanchuan County in Luoyang. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly and said, "This is the Chouyu silk thread that Zumu sent over. It's truly beautiful. If 15 Yang likes it, you can take the remainder back with you." Such silk thread was indeed rare, and Hong Ying was very vain. When she heard Zhang Ruan's offer, she was unable to contain her joy, and immediately took the material back with her. After she had left, Tianju looked at Zhang Ruan in bafflement. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Why does Miss want to do it this way? Is it such a bad idea to have this servant switch the silk directly?" "Of course it's a bad idea." Zhang Ruan smiled slightly as she said, "Xia Yan naturally wants to tidy up everything, but Hong Ying is too clever. If clever people don't have any information that can be used against another clever person, then it is very difficult to guarantee the success of future plans." Of course, Zhang Ruan had not told Tianju the most important reason. Because of what had happened to Pear in her previous life, she would never take pity on the child in Xia Yan's belly, though she would also never deliberately attempt to kill it. Allowing Tianju to take action was one thing, but leading Hong Ying to strike against Xia Yan was another. In her previous life, Xia Yan and Jiang Susu had been experts at getting someone else to do their dirty work. In this life, she was not going to be any less adept. Zhang Ruan ordered Tianju, "Early tomorrow morning, you must tell 15 Yang that the silk thread carries a spice that induces miscarriage, and that this was Foreign's doing." Early in the morning of the next day, at the first glimmer of light when Zhang Ruan was still at her morning ablutions, Hong Ying rushed into Ruanju, bringing the Chouyu silk thread with her. Perhaps due to the abruptness of the news, her mood was somber and she looked highly worried, something which was not only out of the ordinary for her, but was far removed from her usual calm and unhurried elegance. Without preamble, she asked, "Eldest Miss, what on earth is going on?" The previous day, she had really liked that spool of silk thread, and as soon as she had returned to her courtyard had started thinking about which design would be best to embroider first. Thus, she never imagined that Zhang Ruan's personal maidservant, Tianju, would arrive at daybreak to inform her that the thread had been tampered with in a way that would cause a miscarriage. Zhang Ruan poured a cup of tea for her and said, 15 Yang, there is no need to be anxious. I have also been affected by this maneuver." She sighed deeply and went on, "If a virginal young lady from the inner chamber is exposed to this spice, It is feared that, in future, she would be infertile. Hong Ying was further taken aback. This was something she had never considered. She looked hesitantly at Zhang Ruan and asked, "Eldest miss, so what will you do now?" "What else can be done? I have to look for a physician," Zhang Ruan replied, shaking her head. Hong Ying said, "How can this be? That foreign is so vicious as to go as far as harming eldest miss, and even the child in this concubine's belly. This kind of conduct is truly vile. This lowly concubine is merely a servant, but eldest miss is of nobility, a true blue blood, the impressive and upright eldest daughter of the Jiangfu. How can you possibly bear this slight against you? The Empress Dowager loves eldest miss dearly. If eldest miss were to report this matter to the Empress Dowager, she would surely make a decision on your behalf." Jinjiyu. Lit. Golden branches and jade leaves. Figure people of imperial lineage, royalty. A little half-smile hovered around Zhang Ruan's lips as she surveyed Hong Ying. Hong Ying was no fool. She had also considered how to use Zhang Ruan to deal with Xia Yan. Really? There was nothing so conveniently resolved on this earth, and she was also no bodhisattva. Why would she help other people sweep away the obstacles in their path? Does Fifth Yang really think that entering the palace and reporting this matter to the Empress Dowager is the best option? Zhang Ruan asked. Hong Ying's heart pounded. She had discerned that there was a hidden meaning to Zhang Ruan's words, so she asked slowly this. Would it be inappropriate? Fifth Yang has probably thought it through clearly by now. This Choyu silk thread would cause a miscarriage within 3 days of contact. To tell you the truth, my Ruanju is actually not very clean. Moreover, when Fifth Yang carried the silk thread back to your own courtyard yesterday, you must have been seen by quite a few servants along the way. Jiangfu is also not very big, and this small matter will easily be found out if someone were to investigate carefully. Fifth Yang, you are expecting, but you carried the thread without miscarrying. When foreign finds out, who knows what she will think. Hong Ying was taken aback for a moment. In an instant, she understood the intent behind Zhang Ruan's words, and felt chills run down her back. Zhang Ruan continued, I could certainly enter the imperial palace and make a report to the Empress Dowager, but even when foreign is found out, she will undoubtedly not be waiting submissively to be caught. She hates Fifth Yang so much that she would drag you down with her, even if it leads to her death. When the time comes, the imperial physician is not an ordinary person who is susceptible to bribery, and will be able to sniff out any irregularity immediately. If this is the case, I'm afraid that Fifth Yang will also suffer a dismal end. I have nothing to lose, and there will be some retribution if foreign tries to harm me in retaliation. And finally, is Fifth Yang willing to allow all that you've painstakingly worked so hard to achieve come to naught? Is Fifth Yang willing? Each word was uttered like an incantation to bewitch her. Hong Ying muttered, Not willing, I'm not willing. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. Hong Ying looked at Zhang Ruan and abruptly grabbed her sleeve. She said, Miss, save this concubine. This concubine does not want to fall prey to foreign's conspiracy. This concubine just wants to establish a foothold in this fu. She finally understood that this eldest miss of the Jiangfu in front of her, the current Hong and Junju, was the only one who could save her. Although Zhang Ruan did not say a word, Hong Ying knew that she undoubtedly had a way. Fifth Yang does not need to be anxious. Zhang Ruan patted Hong Ying's hand, and her smile became even more gentle. At present, foreign is confident that Fifth Yang will miscarry, so if Fifth Yang does not do so within 3 days, foreign will presumably begin to become suspicious about the child in Fifth Yang's belly. However, what happens if the spool of silk Fifth Yang took with her is not this spool of Choyu silk thread which has been treated with spice? Hong Ying slowly released Zhang Ruan's sleeve, and stared blankly at her. There are 2 spools of Choyu silk thread. One was sent to my courtyard, the other was sent to second sister's courtyard. In order to prove that the material is without any issue, it may be assumed that second sister will also have a set of clothes embroidered in this fashion. If the maidservant were to have taken the wrong material, then Fifth Yang will not miscarry, which is Fifth Yang's good fortune. Hong Ying gradually regained her senses. If Zhang Ruan's spool of silk could be exchanged with the one which had nothing wrong with it, then Zhang Susu's spool would be the one treated with spice. Hong Ying would not miscarry because the person who would be someone else. Hong Ying opened and closed her mouth several times, and looked at Zhang Ruan with some degree of incredulity. She said, "It is easy for eldest miss to say this, but how is this concubine going to exchange the silk?" She pondered for a while before saying, "Eldest miss has so many outstandingly capable people, is it possible for eldest miss to?" Fifth Yang, Zhang Ruan cut in before she could finish speaking. "Although foreign and I have a history of contention, there is no time limit involved. If I should desire to retaliate sometime in future, I will naturally think of a way to do so. However, Fifth Yang cannot afford to wait. Fifth Yang, if you cannot exchange the silk within 3 days, then your only recourse," she smiled faintly, "is to think of a way to miscarry. You can, of course, use this method, but that means that Fifth Yang will have lost your bargaining chip." Hong Ying's heart dropped like a stone. Every single word spoken by Zhang Ruan had struck at her vital spot. It was true, in order to avoid suspicion, she could pretend to miscarry, but this would mean the loss of her bargaining chip. If she could exchange the silk, then not only would she cause all of Xia Yan's hopes, centered on the child in her womb, to become futile, she would also be able to make a clean sweep by striking from within. After all, wasn't that spice a result of Xia Yan's own machinations? Zhang Ruan's voice floated softly to her ears. Fifth Yang is seriously not thinking about getting rid of the child in foreign's belly? Fifth Yang, why don't you listen to your heart? Hong Ying's body trembled violently. Yes, she hated Xia Yan, and hated even more that lump of flesh within her belly. Because of this, now would be a good time to strike against Xia Yan in the Fu and vanquish her, leaving Jiang Quan to pay much more attention to her. Hong Ying considered Zhang Ruan profoundly. Without warning, she stood up and said, "This concubine offers eldest miss many thanks for her suggestion." Zhang Ruan smiled but said nothing. People's hearts were all the same. Envious, unwilling, competitive, hostile. A tiny nudge was enough to completely topple one's reason. Hong Ying had already made her choice. That's how it was with the affairs of the world. If one wanted something, one would have to pay an equivalent price. Before she left, Hong Ying turned towards Zhang Ruan and said softly, "Eldest miss, when you sent the silk to this concubine, you really did not know that it had been contaminated by this lethal spice." Zhang Ruan lifted up her teacup and slowly took a sip. "I did not know." Hong Ying remained silent as she turned and left. After she was gone, Tianzhu walked over to Zhang Ruan's side and said, "Will she actually have a way to exchange the silk thread?" Of course. Zhang Ruan stared in concentration. From a prostitute in a pleasure house to the position of a concubine who could rival the main wife and earn the favor of Jiang Quan, Hong Ying was clearly no ordinary woman. For so many years she had been a thorn in Xia Yan's side, yet had remained unscathed. If she was devoid of capability, she would have been already devoured, without even bones remaining. Hong Ying was not Zhao Mei. She was more intelligent than Zhao Mei, as well as more ruthless. Tianzhu observed Zhang Ruan but said nothing. This situation had not required Zhang Ruan to take action, and had even resulted in information which could be held against Hong Ying. It was indubitably a far better solution than sending Tianzhu to exchange the silk thread. Zhang Ruan lowered her eyes, but an odd smile appeared on her face. There was no mother in the world who did not suffer agony when she lost her child. The pain that she had experienced in her previous life would not only be suffered by Xia Yan in this one, but to a more painful degree. Chapter 109. An Unexpected Turn of Events. Part 1. Chapter 109. An Unexpected Turn of Events. Part 1. The 6th lunar month's weather was like the disposition of a woman, fickle and often changing on a whim. It was obviously a sunny, clear and cloudless morning, but by midday, it had begun to pour down in buckets. Whilst this rain was torrential, still it brought about a refreshing coolness from the blistering hot summer. Xia Yan was sitting by the open window, allowing the coolness brought on by the rain to blow upon her face to brush away the past few days of haze. Since she was expecting, she was afraid to catch a cold, so even on hot summer days she did not use ice in the room. Thus this cooling rain was a welcome relief for the summer's heat. Fei Chui placed an outer coat gently on Xia Yan and advised, "Foreign must be careful not to catch a cold." No harm in doing so. Xia Yan comfortably closed her eyes. She was feeling rather good, so that even her face seemed to glow and was reminiscent of what she used to look like before pregnancy. Furthermore, the sleeves on her clothes were embroidered with a white butterfly dancing in flight. It was indeed well embroidered, both sparkling and glittering. Xia Yan lowered her head to glance at it and was utterly pleased. Since becoming pregnant, she was unable to wear most of her clothes, so instead she had to wear larger loose-fitting garments. Which woman would not want to look beautiful? So she had to devise other means to make these clothes look more appealing. Jiang Su had divided her silk threads, and then had some sent to her, so she had used them to embroider on the sleeves of her clothes. Firstly, the silk threads were indeed quite beautiful, and secondly, when Hongying suffered a misfortune later, naturally, some people would doubt and blame her, so using these similar threads on herself would actually help deflect any suspicion. Merely thinking about Hongying, Xia Yan's mouth lifted into a pleasant smile. She had spent a huge sum to acquire this particular herb, and it was not even available in the city. Any regular doctor would not even be able to smell it. Moreover, even if they could pick up the smell, everyone would point fingers at Zhang Ruan. The servant had personally noted that Hongying had carried back the silk thread. Xia Yan was almost about to burst out in laughter. Even the gods were aiding her to lead Hongying towards death. Today was already the second day, and by tomorrow, Hongying would definitely miscarry. Fei Chui gently fanned Xia Yan, and Xia Yan swirled and sucked a sour plum in her mouth. In recent days, she had found herself wanting to eat sour things and had instructed the kitchen to pickle some fresh green plums. The plum was in her mouth, but before the tartness could fill her mouth, suddenly Xia Yan felt an intense pain in her abdomen. Her hand trembled, and she spat out the plum while clutching her stomach. It hurts. Fei Chui and Lin Lang were petrified, and hurried to support Xia Yan. What's wrong, foreign? Where does it hurt? Xia Yan felt an intensifying pain as if a knife was gutting her abdomen. Unexpectedly she tumbled down from the stool, rolling on the ground holding her middle in pain. The two servants were so scared that their faces were white. Fei Chui queried, "Foreign can't be about to give birth, right? But it's not the right time yet." Ah! Lin Lang let out a blood-curdling scream, and her body began to involuntarily shiver as she looked upon Xia Yan, who was sporting a large bloodstain on the lower half of her body. They were no ignorant boudoir girls, and naturally understood what this scenario signified. Upon seeing the situation, Fei Chui was somewhat out of her wits. What should we do? Hold on to the baby, foreign. This servant will go find master, and call for a physician to come quickly. Stop! Stop! Even though her headache was so severe that large droplets of sweat littered her forehead, Xia Yan was still able to maintain her clear-headedness. She faintly understood she could be miscarrying, thus her heart felt a sense of pain and shock. Yet, she strenuously ordered, "Do so discreetly. Don't let anyone else in the Fu know." Saying this, she let out another blood-curdling screech as she continued to press on her abdomen and roll on the floor. Zhang Ruan had just finished a chapter in her book when Tianzhu swiftly came to her side. Lowering her voice, she whispered, "Xia Yan has miscarried. Indeed, the strength of that herb is lethal. However, she has yet to alert others to the situation." Tianzhu continued, "They only went out to find a physician, and it would seem the physician has just left with a decent amount of silver. Do you have a companion?" Zhang Ruan looked towards Tianzhu. "Come up with a means to preserve the life of that physician, as Xia Yan will most certainly want to silence him for good. I have a use for that person." Tianzhu replied, "This subordinate will go make the arrangements." After Tianzhu departed, Zhang Ruan's gaze fell upon the basket of light refreshments before her. Within the basket was a tiny sprig of plum. It really wasn't the season for fresh plums, but today, Lu Zhu had found it amusing and had picked it anyway. This plum that had not yet ripened was pitifully tiny, and it most definitely was not its harvest time. Zhang Ruan placed the plum within the palm of her hand, and the slow trace of a smile appeared. Within Yanhua Yuan, Xia Yan was lying down on the bed, her complexion ashen like a corpse. The room was saturated with a strong stench of blood. Lin Lang looked at the unrecognizable and bloodied flesh that was in the wooden bucket and couldn't control the chill that crept into her body. The physician had said that Xia Yan had conceived a male fetus that had already formed. However, it was unsure what fragrance she had inhaled just before that had induced a pregnant person to suffer a miscarriage. This particular fragrant herb was especially lethal, not only inducing a miscarriage, but also seemed to harm the core of the womb. Therefore, she would not be able to conceive ever again. Xia Yan already had Jiang Chao and Jiang Su, so even if she could never bear another child, her position within the Fu was still secured. However, they were all aware of where the fragrant herb had originated from, as it was obviously what Xia Yan had used on that particular spool of Choyu silk thread meant for Zhang Ruan with the intention of using it to deal with Hong Ying. Xia Yan had a dead and lifeless look in her eyes that were transfixed on the extremely fine design on the canopy that hung above her head. If it weren't for the occasional movement of her pupils, most people would have already assumed she had died. Choyu silk, Choyu silk. Xia Yan snickered bitterly, so this was the outcome. Hong Ying, that slut, had actually swapped the Choyu silk? Was it possible that there was a spy within their courtyard? Someone who conspired with others to have the two spools of silk switched? So now Hong Ying's belly still held yet another **guard while her own child was lost. Within Xia Yan began to fester a deep-seated blood hatred that forbids one's enemies to continue to live under the same sky. Xia Yan felt like a knife was twisting within her heart when she thought about the child that had been in her womb. This child that had stayed in her womb for so long and was almost reaching full term had just prematurely perished. Furthermore, it had been a boy. What would Jiang Quan do after receiving the news? He'd most likely be terribly disappointed, so how could she inform him? And if she told him, then wouldn't the guard in Hong Ying's womb rise up to a prominent position like a fishback in Water Star? Not willing. Now that her own child was dead, she would definitely have Hong Ying's guard be buried together with him. Ryudeshui. Like a fishback in water. Fig to be in a rightful position. Timidly, Lin Lang walked forward. Foreign. Should we inform second miss? Don't let her know that I've miscarried. Xia Yan spoke with great effort. Just let her know that there is a problem with the silk threads and she shouldn't use them. Xia Yan continued in a thin voice filled with suppressed anger. Regarding this matter, if anyone else comes to know of the situation, the lives of your family won't be spared. Fei Chui and Lin Lang trembled and collectively lowered their heads, responding, your servants understand. Now leave. Xia Yan was obviously unwilling to continue the conversation. Just as Fei Chui and Lin Lang were about to retreat, Lin Lang suddenly asked cautiously, Then what should we do with the young master's corpse? Xia Yan stared blankly, looking out of the window. This weather meant that the corpse couldn't be kept for too long, but as she looked at the wooden bucket, she felt a rising agitation. After a moment, she laughed coldly and said, What's dead is dead. Naturally, it needs to be taken out and thrown away. She turned her head away somewhat disgusted. Make sure you do it discreetly and leave no loose ends for others to use against us. Fei Chui and Lin Lang's hearts were petrified. This was her own flesh and blood. Yet Xia Yan was cold-hearted to the point that it made others somewhat terrified. However, with the situation at hand, there wasn't really any better way of dealing with it. Both of them certainly didn't know what Xia Yan was up to, so they could only accept the task and departed accordingly. Xia Yan laid down on her bed, and from the corner of her eye a teardrop trickled down. But when she turned on her side, the tear disappeared quietly, and a viciousness flashed in her eyes. Her child had suffered such a tragic end. This meant that the guard in Hong Ying's womb must suffer an end 1,000 times, no tens of thousand times worse. Deep into the night, a light was lit in a small room within Yanhua Yuan. Typical of the weather after the rain had stopped, there was still a light breeze in the night, causing that flame of the candle to waver, light and shadows, creating an eerie feel. A small quiet voice sounded. Was that thing dealt with properly? I was afraid to arouse any suspicion, but I handled it very cleanly, and used a coarse sackcloth to wrap it. No one noticed. The other person whispered in reply. That's good then. AI, the weather tonight seems rather gloomy, giving off that eerie feel. You don't think that it could be a lingering ghost? Shoo shoo shoo, what nonsense are you sprouting this late in the night? The lowered whisper inflected that sense of warding off the taboo topic, as it quickly interrupted the other voice by saying, It's already so late. Now that everything has been dealt with, I will go back first. Okay, the other voice replied, followed by the sound of footfall briskly departing. The candle in the room illuminated the face of the person before the table. This was Xia Yan's personal maid, Lin Lang. Earlier she had handed the dead fetus to one of the courtyard Momo, saying that it had belonged to one of the filthy maids who had an affair outside the Fu and had given birth to this child, and so needed the Momo to take the package and sell it somewhere far away. Although it was taboo to say such things, the old woman had received sufficient silver in compensation, so she didn't delve any deeper but went about the task of disposing of it. Although it all seemed to have been handled discreetly and properly, Lin Lang could not shake the sense of unease that had risen in her heart, as if something was about to happen. Presently, Xia Yan continued to need someone beside her as she pretended that she had not miscarried and her fetus was stable and would reach full term. Therefore, Lin Lang could only secretly boil tonic specifically to help her body recover from her miscarriage. After the old maidservant separated from Lin Lang, she patted the heavy purse chuckling. Lin Lang's hefty amount of silver was more than enough to get the job done. Moreover, the fetus could also be sold for a decent amount of money. However, it was still attached to its placenta, which was a good commodity, and within the capital, there were some medical stores that sold these in private. Normally they would buy these dead infants to sell to others, but some young ladies from nobility would specifically require the placenta to maintain their beauty. But these placentas were usually bloody and most of them would not consume them in broad daylight nor out in the open, so most of the placentas were bought secretly and privately. Oh! Fortunately today the old maidservant had not only received a dead infant from Lin Lang, she also managed to sell it to a medical shop and receive 2 silver coins. How could she not be overjoyed? And at once left in high spirits to have a drink. Chapter 109. To an Unexpected Turn of Events, Part 2. Chapter 109. An Unexpected Turn of Events, Part 2. Within Su Exine Yuan, Hu Dai brought over a transparent gem-colored glass bowl, and presented it to Jiang Su. Miss, best to take this while it's still hot. Whatever was in the bowl had been boiled until it was scalding hot, and upon looking at its color, one couldn't help but want to gag. Even though the fragrance was pleasant to the nose, it still made one's stomach protest. Jiang Su put down the brand new lipstick she was holding, and nonchalantly took the glass bowl from Hu Dai. Using a jade spoon, she gently stirred the contents as she asked indifferently, "So there was one available today? Recently they have been rather scarce in the city, but the medical shop owner said that this was received only today and is still very fresh." This servant spent 200 pieces of silver to buy it. Hu Dai stoically replied, "I understand, go to the accounts later to collect the silver." Jiang Su then raised the bowl to her nose and gently sniffed, revealing an intoxicated look. After all, this was not her first time consuming infant placenta, and it was all thanks to placentas that all the scars on her face were able to recover so fast. This item was highly treasured and not readily available, and while others were adverse towards its bloodiness, she definitely wasn't. For the sake of her appearance, she was prepared to go to any length. Soon enough she would also be able to stop taking chicken's blood as her complexion had now recovered to the point of being both beautiful and alluring beyond compare. It was now time to go out and about. Jiang Su lifted up the bowl and slowly savored the delicacy, while nearby Hu Dai stood still and had to fight off the strong urge to throw up. A piece of cloth was lying quietly in the pile of debris at the entrance of Su Exine Yuan's maidservant's storage room, and upon a closer look, it looked like a material that had been used to wrap something. It was a piece of coarse sackcloth with dark brown stains. Afraid that it would get cold during the night, Lu Zhu closed the window, leaving a crack small enough so that it wouldn't allow in a large gust of cold wind, but just enough for the room to ventilate and stay cool. The weather had been cool and refreshing today, so they didn't have to use any ice. Just then Tianju walked in from outside and came before Zhang Ruan, who was preparing for bed. She whispered a few sentences by Zhang Ruan's ear, and Zhang Ruan's eyes flashed as she smiled slightly. So that's what had happened. Tianju could not help frowning. Xia Yan had ordered someone to take the dead fetus out of the food to deal with it, and by some twisted sense of fate, it was then purchased by someone from Su Exine Yuan and brought right back in. That would mean that Jiang Su had just partaken of her own biological brother's placenta. Just thinking to this point she was so aghast, and the action was so abhorrent that she felt a chill run through her blood. Jiang Ruan stated, "The world naturally has its own karma." Tianzhu proceeded, "Xia Yan had chosen to conceal the news of her miscarriage. It can't be that she is planning to find a substitute. After suffering such a big loss, how can Xia Yan be content with just that? If she really does find a substitute, won't that be taking her goodwill too far?" She tucked some hair that was in front of her eyes behind her ears, revealing earlobes that were like snow-white jade. "Then Miss." Jiang Ruan shook her head. "There is nothing to be concerned about as she is currently fixated on Hong Ying. And isn't Hong Ying always yapping at her heels? We just need to sit back and watch a good show." It was not yet time for her to make her move, so there was no need to act rashly. Tianzhu thought for a moment before agreeing and then took her leave. "Oh." After Tianzhu departed, Jiang Ruan pressed her forehead before sitting down, intending to further mull over the matter only to realize that she was too tired. So she stood up again and was about to remove her outer garments when she heard a familiar voice speak out, "Wait a moment." Jiang Ruan was slightly startled, and before she realized, she had instinctively reached out her hand to grab the dagger under her pillow. From the shadows of the candle light walked out a person who drew nearer and nearer before coming to a stop a couple of steps away from her. Even though he was completely clothed in black, he still managed to carry a debonair and distinguished air as if attired in brocade. His appearance was without rival, and if it wasn't Xiao Xiao, then who else could it be? For him to come uninvited, even Jiang Ruan, who usually plastered on a smiling expression, couldn't help the coldness that crept onto her face as she angrily spoke. "Xiao Wangya, what's the meaning of this? Is this what the imperial rules have taught you?" Immediately after the words were out of her mouth, she began to regret it. While she had been conferred the title of Hong'an Junju, Xiao Xiao was the commander of 300,000 genie guards, the current master of the genieing Wangfu. So based on ranking, she was still way beneath Xiao Xiao by a big margin. However, for Xiao Xiao to suddenly appear uninvited, she couldn't help but feel startled. Moreover, normally Xiao Xiao never pulled rank nor acted arrogantly in front of her, so she had actually forgotten that the person before her had the ability to turn the great Jin dynasty into chaos. It was only when she had collected herself that she realized the severity of her words and how impertinent they were. However, the words once spoken were like spilt water, there was no way she could take them back. Thus, she had to confidently put on an affronted expression towards Xiao Xiao even though her heart was apprehensive. Xiao Xiao, who was accustomed to seeing Jiang Ruan's easygoing and composed manner, and her tranquil and indifferent attitude that was generally accompanied by a slight smile, was completely caught off guard in the face of her lack of composure. Although he was born into the imperial clan, and there was a certain aristocratic deportment and manner expected of him, since accepting the Genie Guard's commander's role he had been out on the road for many years. Therefore, it was natural that he had picked up some habits from the Jianghu, a flamboyant, no stickler to conventions secular worldview. Thus it seemed as though he had unwittingly regarded her as his own people, and had not considered the fact that she was also a young woman. Furthermore, he had not taken into consideration the time, so it was only natural for her to react as such when she realized that someone else was present in her room as soon as she turned around. Once he had thought to this point, Xiao Xiao could not help feeling a little ashamed, and pursing his lips he replied, "I'm sorry for not being considerate." As he spoke, he faced Jiang Ruan in all seriousness. He noticed that her eyes reflected a guilty conscience while pretending to cast an angry look. He momentarily drew a blank and then found the situation funny. To have the magnificent Xiao Wangya of the Great Jin dynasty apologize to her, Jiang Ruan felt that it wasn't right to show any attitude. Internally she was annoyed that she hadn't been able to maintain her composure just then. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the table and sat down. While pouring Xiao Xiao and herself a cup of tea, she spoke up. For Xiao Wangya to barge into a lady's chamber in the middle of the night, I guess there must be some highly urgent matter. Xiao Xiao didn't take the sarcasm in her words to heart, but his heroic eyebrows frowned slightly. Did you use the Chouyu silk that Xia Yan sent you? Jiang Ruan was surprised as she had not thought that Xiao Xiao would actually come merely because of this matter. She supposed Tianzhu must have reported this matter. Tianzhu had initially come to her. However, Tianzhu's livelihood depended on Xiao Xiao. Therefore, Zhang Ruan did not have any expectation of total loyalty towards herself. She nodded her head in reply. Xiao Xiao disapproved. There's a particular herb mixed into the material. You should not be so impetuous. Tianzhu already neutralized the herb. Zhang Ruan had given it no further thought at all. At that time, she only wanted to ensure that Hong Ying would lay down her vigilance, so she had Tianzhu neutralize the herb that was on her own spool of silk so that it could no longer cause any harm to the person using it. But Tianzhu could have also made a mistake and failed. There is always a possibility of a mishap, Xiao Xiao stated in a neutral tone. Tianzhu had been learning martial arts since childhood, so while standing guard outside the room she could clearly hear their conversation. Xiao Xiao's words caused her some grievances. Although she couldn't be considered as one of the best neutralizers or detoxifiers of poison, this insignificant poison was definitely no problem for her at all. Zhang Ruan was about to say more when Xiao Xiao suddenly reached out and grabbed hold of her wrist. He was a man and naturally had superior strength compared to Zhang Ruan, so she could not avoid it. Xiao Xiao attentively took her pulse, but while Zhang Ruan felt rather awkward, she did not struggle to break free. Her gaze fell upon the hand that was holding onto her wrist. It was vastly different from Zhang Xianji's large battle-scarred hands that came from close combat training and were sun-tanned. Xiao Xiao's hands were slender, their bones well-proportioned, and on the fingertips were a light layer of calluses that were obtained from practicing martial arts. His fingers were slightly cold, but his palm was dry and warm. After taking her pulse, Xiao Xiao retracted his hands, but his gaze, for a split second, had revealed a sense of perplexity. Zhang Ruan was a person who was observant, and noticing Xiao Xiao's expression, she asked, "Were the effects of the herb removed?" To be honest, she wasn't that concerned about the matter of the herb, as it was just a matter of having children. In this life she had not even thought about getting married. "It's not that." Xiao Xiao thought it through, and with a shake of his head, he looked at her. "Your body is far too weak." Zhang Ruan smiled without saying a thing. Weak? In the previous life, when she had returned from the rural residence to the Jiangfu back then, that was what one would call weak. She was emaciated to skin and bones, to the point that there wasn't any appearance of a human form. Back then she was bedridden, riddled with illness for many years, taking medication non-stop, yet her body did not show signs of recovery. If it weren't for the emperor's edict seeking to handpick some young ladies, she was sure that she would have remained sick for many more years. In this life, although she had returned much earlier from the rural residence, those early years of illness had already affected her foundation, so her health wasn't the best. Currently she was adequately nursing herself, even though she was aware that her core was still deteriorating. Hence, she was paying specific attention to taking care of her body because she needed to preserve her life first in order to exact her revenge. Xiao Xiao noticed that Zhang Ruan's gaze had seemed to transcend him, as if deep in thought. He felt that this young lady before him at that moment seemed to be that much more distant and remote. His brows knitted as his heart felt a sliver of unease. This was a rather unfamiliar feeling, and Xiao Xiao could not process what it meant. Pondering for a moment, he spoke, "If there is a chance in the future, I will take you to my master. His medical skills are quite superior. There is a possibility he can nurse you back to health." Zhang Ruan was pulled back from her thoughts at Xiao Xiao's words. Looking at the black-cladded young man before her with his pitch-black eyes filled with all seriousness, she couldn't help being momentarily stunned. Many thanks. Since associating with Xiao Xiao, it was apparent that she had uttered many thanks countless times. Xiao Xiao stood up. "It's rather late now, I'll head back first. You try and get an early rest." Sweeping another glance over her, he then flew out of the window. Did he really take the Jiangfu as his own courtyard, such that he would come and go on a whim? Zhang Ruan was dumbfounded before suddenly trying to recall what Xiao Xiao had just done. Did he just come to take her pulse? Was he bewitched? Zhang Ruan blew to extinguish the candle before getting into bed. Her initial weariness had somehow dissipated with Xiao Xiao's disruptive visit. It was clear that she was no longer tired and was unable to sleep now. Xiao Xiao lingered to watch the lights in the room go out before he turned and departed. The next day, after a passing summer shower, the sun was blazing high in the clear sky. It was vastly different from the recent overcast gloomy weather, and it remained sunny for the next several days. Meanwhile, everything in the Fu had been following its usual orderliness. Fifth Yin Yang was blissfully nursing her pregnancy within her courtyard, and Xia Yan was also seen hefting her big pregnant body out to stroll in the gardens. From all appearances there was no difference. However, the peacefulness on the surface did not mean that it was truly all tranquil and harmonious. For example, Fifth Yin Yang Hong Ying was not actually blissfully nursing her pregnancy in accordance with what the servants had let leak out from the courtyard. Rather, she was constantly fretful and impatient, asking the maidservant who had returned, "What exactly is happening? Is there no news that you are able to glean?" Answering Yin Yang, the maidservant reported, "This servant has inquired at Su Xian Yuan, but they have not received news of someone miscarrying at Yanhua Yuan. Moreover, there hasn't been any physician invited over, and Foreign has only requested her maids to get medication for the nursing of the fetus from the medical store." "How is this possible?" Hong Ying muttered. Over the last few days she had been frantic with anxiety, anxious to receive news of Xia Yan's miscarriage. So how was it that during the same time, Yanhua Yuan had become impenetrable to the point that even a fly could not fly in? Hence there wasn't even an iota of a chance to pick up any news. This was the reason why they could only go to Su Xian Yuan to seek information, as should there be a movement on Xia Yan's side, Jiang Su would most definitely be in the know. Thus, with the report from her maid that there wasn't any news regarding Xia Yan, even from Su Xian Yuan, how could Hong Ying come to terms with that? Was it possible that Xia Yan had found out about it? "Yin Yang, don't panic," the servant at her side advised. "Maybe Foreign was fortunate, and has not used the Choyu silk yet, which is why she has not miscarried." Hong Ying's mind settled. Of course, there was the possibility that Xia Yan had not used the Choyu silk, as when one was pregnant there was nothing much to their wardrobe worth using such exquisite material for. So it was possible that Xia Yan wanted to use that Choyu silk after giving birth? Once she thought it through, Hong Ying breathed a sigh of relief, yet almost immediately, her expression turned spiteful. How in the world could she be that lucky? Chapter 110. One Dong Yinger, Part 1. Chapter 110. Dong Yinger, Part 1. Xiao Xiao handed a letter over to Jin Eyre, who then hurried out of the door. Upon seeing this, Guanliang Han was stunned. "It's not the end of the year yet. What are you writing to the old man for?" Old man was what Guanliang Han called their master, Teacher Ba Qi, and Xiao Xiao had yet to formally go and greet him since returning from Miao borders. He said, "I'm making a trip to Mtjianan." Mtjianan was where Teacher Ba Qi lived, and was also where his 8 disciples usually studied. Teacher Ba Qi was a rather peculiar person. He not only knew astronomy and geography, but was also proficient in internal medicine, and even understood battlefield formations. The late emperor once invited him to assist him, but Teacher Ba Qi, who was just a youth at the time, rejected him, saying that it was impossible to go against heaven's will. An array was laid out on Mtjianan which no one could pierce, so normally no one could ever find it. "Going to Mtjianan? Third brother, wait for me." Emotsong jumped up. "I want to go too." "What are you going for?" Guanliang Han asked. With Emotsong's mischievous personality, he was the one most afraid of Teacher Ba Qi when he studied under him in the past. Recently, the emperor has put more and more trust in that grand tutor Lu Min. Last time I made a mistake he scolded me a lot. Normally I wouldn't care, but this guy is as stiff as a rock and gives a lecture for even the littlest things. He can't tolerate even a grain of sand. He really pisses me off. Emotsong was a genuine aristocratic family's pampered young master. Although he had been smart and crafty, albeit with a sense of righteousness since youth, he was also brought up by his father in the midst of officials. He knew that water that was too clear had no fish. Upon meeting a strictly by-the-books person like Grand Tutor Lu Min, he almost vomited blood in anger. Therefore, he could only go to his master for help. "You mean that Nu Zhuangyuan?" Guanliang Han had never been a scholarly type. "So pedantic there's no point talking to them. Just beat them up and it'll be fine." "For assaulting a court official, you're not afraid of the imperial censor?" Xiao Xiao stared at the eager Emotsong, causing him to deflate like a punctured ball. Guanliang Han looked rather disappointed that he hadn't succeeded. Turning to Xiao Xiao, he asked, "When are you leaving?" Now Xiao Xiao replied. Zhang Ruan really wasn't used to not seeing Xiao Xiao for so many days, and once she realized this, a faint worry arose in her heart. For Xiao Xiao to let her get used to his presence in such a short time wasn't necessarily a good thing for Zhang Ruan. Though she still didn't know what Xiao Xiao did for a living, she knew it couldn't be easy. There wasn't even a hint of similarity between Xiao Xiao and the many dandies in the capital. In addition, he also gave a sense of reassurance that made people overlook his age. But in the end, what Xiao Xiao did had nothing to do with her. Rather, she cared more about the demons in the Fu. For example, a few days ago, Hong Ying pestered Zhang Quan to invite a physician to the Fu to check up on the pregnant women. Initially, the main wife Xia Yan, who was about to give birth, was in a very irritable mood, and had refused Hong Ying's suggestion without another word. So then Hong Ying acted spoiled towards Zhang Quan until Xia Yan was basically forced to get her pulse checked. The physician said her pulse was stable, but the fetus was affected because Xia Yan was disturbed by Hong Ying's actions. Thus Zhang Quan became angry and refused to go to Hong Ying's courtyard for several days. He also felt guilty, so he accompanied Xia Yan more. Lu Zhu asked in a perplexed manner, "That's strange, Foreign's child obviously didn't survive. How come she's with child again?" Xia Yan suffered a loss, so she'd obviously become smarter. If she couldn't even do this much, wouldn't she have long been soundly defeated by Hong Ying? Zhang Ruan flicked through Dong Yinger's messages, inviting her to go to the capital magistrate Fu tomorrow to play, but Zhang Ruan didn't recognize many of the names she mentioned. In fact, there hadn't been much time between her return to the capital from the rural residence and accompanying the Empress Dowager out of the city. Therefore, it was impossible for her to have sincere friendships with anyone in that short time. But now that she'd come back in such a high-profile manner, it was time to break into the upper-class circles. These connections must be well maintained. Then we'll just watch Fifth Yin Yang suffer? Lu Zhu asked. Miss doesn't really like Fifth Yin Yang, right? Zhang Ruan had always been partial to Hong Ying and seemed very enthusiastic towards her. But her mates had known since the silk thread incident that Zhang Ruan actually never considered Hong Ying as one of her own. Zhang Ruan smiled. Human greed never ends. Hong Ying may have once only thought of peacefully living as a concubine, but after she had lived a bit better, what she wanted was the seat of the Jiangfu's main wife. One could never trust this kind of greedy person too much. What's more, she'd always hated everybody in the Jiangfu. Thus where had this like come from? Lian Xiao, grinning, said, "Let's not talk about this. Say Miss hasn't seen Miss Dong and the others for 3 years. This servant heard that Miss Dong is of age, and will be married into the Chong family by the year's end." Dong Yinger? Zhang Ruan frowned. Dong Yinger married a third-rank salt merchant called Chong'an in her past life. The two had become engaged when young, and should have lived a comfortable life together. She recalled seeing them from afar during a palace banquet, where they were so affectionate that it made her envious. Calculating the time, it should be around now. Dong Yinger should be married by the time summer ends. After Dong Yinger married, it should be Lin Zixiang's turn soon. In her last life, Lin Zixiang married third prince Xian Exan. Xian Exan's birth mother passed away early, so no one cared about him and he eventually turned into a dissolute loafer. He rarely left his residence and barely ever entered the palace, so he became the least noticeable prince. He was known to be a lecher with many concubines and outside lovers. In the previous life, Imperial Consort Chun personally bestowed upon him a marriage with Lin Zixiang. However, in the end, Lin Zixiang lost her life because of fighting with one of his favored concubines, taking the Lin family down as a result. Zhang Ruan frowned. Counting the days, there was still a period of time until the marriage proclamation. Should she think of a way to stop it? Or should she ask Empress Dowager Ida for help? Shaking her head, Zhang Ruan put the issue to one side for the moment. She'd ask Lin Zixiang for news when she saw her tomorrow. The next day, Bai Ji and Lian Xiao got up early to help her dress because it was Zhang Ruan's first meeting with all of the noble young ladies since her return to the capital. Dong Yinger was an affable person, so naturally there would be many well-bred ladies invited to the gathering. Furthermore, now that she was a princess, she couldn't act the same as before, else others would criticize her every mistake. After washing up, Zhang Ruan ordered, "Tianzhu and Baiji will go with me. Lian Xiao, Lu Zhu stay in the Fu. Be careful when dealing with Yan Huayuan. Although Baizhi and Lian Qiao were first-ranked maids while Tianzhu and Lu Zhu were second-ranked maids, Zhang Ruan saw them as equals. Tianzhu knew martial arts and was suitable to bring out. Baizhi had a calm temperament, so she should learn how to interact with other noble ladies in the future. Lian Qiao was daring while Lu Zhu was more quick-witted, so they should stay in the Fu. If Hong Ying or Xia Yan made any movements against Zhang Ruan, they'd be able to fend them off for a while. Lian Qiao and Lu Zhu had no objection to this arrangement. Zhang Ruan also considered if she should look for an etiquette Momo to have by her side for the sake of appearances, as Zhou Momo had been sent back to the Zhao family 3 years ago. She was already blind and Zhao Guang felt that he owed her, and would definitely see to her needs until the end. Chapter 110. Tu Dong Yinger Part 2. Chapter 110. Dong Yinger Part 2. In the inner courtyard of the capital magistrate Fu, a group of young ladies sat chatting and laughing together around tables laden with tea and snacks. Rongya Junju smiled and asked, "Why hasn't eldest Zhang Miss arrived yet? Could it be that now that she's a Junju, she wants to show off her power?" Rongya Junju was the pearl in Grand Prince Yong's palm. Grand Prince Yong, being the elder cousin of the previous emperor, had a close relationship with him. Thus, when the 4 princes rebelled, Grand Prince Yong helped the current emperor to suppress them. As a result, she also enjoyed a high status in the Great Jin. In fact, Rongya Junju had met Zhang Ruan 3 years ago on the Linglong boat. Only she had been arrogant since childhood, and someone unfavored like Zhang Ruan, who grew up in a faraway village, didn't enter her eyes at all. However, unexpectedly, in the blink of an eye, Zhang Ruan had managed to receive the same ranking as herself and could now compete with her as a Junju. It was impossible for her not to be jealous, filling her words with barbs. Zhao Jin frowned while Wen Fei Fei also felt a little unhappy. These two, being daughters of military families, had always been somewhat scornful of other noble ladies' circuitous ramblings, and instinctively felt there were some unpleasant undertones hidden within Rongya Junju's words. Lin Zixiang was more straightforward than those two, clearly expressing her dislike and stiffly retorted, "According to Yinger's invitation to Ruan Mimi, it's not time to start yet." Rongya Junju was the one who came almost an hour in advance. Could it be that it doesn't matter what Yinger's invitation says, only what Junju thinks? Rongya Junju flushed at Lin Zixiang's words, anger burning a hole in her heart. If it were anyone else she could snap back, but it had to be the obstinate Lin Zixiang. If she kept arguing, it would only bring shame upon herself. Although she internally gritted her teeth in hatred, on the surface Rongya Junju only expressed that she couldn't care less about Lin Zixiang. "I'm too lazy to argue with you." Lin Zixiang still wanted to continue, but Dong Yinger hurried over to mediate. "Let's not fight. I'm the one who invited everyone. If you quarrel, I'll be embarrassed." She had invited a lot of noble young ladies over to relieve her boredom, but this didn't mean she welcomed such a big ruckus. A few other young ladies also came over to help them reconcile. Before long, Dong Yinger's maid trotted over, all smiles. "Junju has arrived." When the young ladies turned towards the door, they saw a young lady in red slowly approaching. She wore a pink and orange skirt decorated with white magnolia flowers and a double-breasted ivory-colored robe with red and gold brocade, along with a ruby hairpin carved in the shape of auspicious clouds. The skirt remained motionless as she walked, clearly resembling a ball of fire, but when she got closer it seemed more like ice. There was even less need to discuss her appearance. When Zhang Ruan was young, her features, though charming, had not reached their full potential. But now she had fully developed into a budding beauty, showing a more mature freshness. The combination of a blossoming young woman and her own enchanting nature, it could take the breath away of the beholder. As she stepped closer, Rongya Junju's face increasingly turned uglier by a few degrees because in front of such a beautiful countenance, she was merely a clown. The more arrogant a person was, the more they couldn't abide others being better than themselves, not to mention it was Zhang Ruan, whom Rongya Junju had deemed beneath her. It was utterly insulting. Once Zhang Ruan arrived before them, she covered her lips and chuckled. "Eldest Zhang Miss, why is it just you? I thought your second sister would also come." "Second Zhang Miss is a wonderful person and you're both the Zhang family's daughters. Is your relationship not as harmonious as rumored?" Jiang Ruan could guess what Rongya Junju thought with a single glance. She smiled and replied, "That's not right." "What?" Taken aback, Rongya Junju didn't know what Jiang Ruan meant by this. Dong Yinger originally wanted to intercede, but upon hearing her reply, she was rendered speechless and could only look warily at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan said lightly, "Rongya Junju is wrong. We are of the same rank, so you should call me Junju. If this spreads, wouldn't it be slapping the imperial family's face?" Rongya Junju never imagined that Jiang Ruan would make a fuss about this. Or more accurately, she never imagined that Jiang Ruan would dare to talk to her in this manner. Although Jiang Ruan had blatantly flaunted her princess status, her words were absolutely correct. Moreover, Rongya Junju had always maintained her noble demeanor. So with Jiang Ruan's demand for proper etiquette, reluctantly she said, "Junju." Jiang Ruan replied gently, "No need to be polite. Since today is just an ordinary gathering of us sisters, we don't need to care about rules and etiquette. You can call me by my name as usual." "You." Rongya Junju had never been messed around like this, to the point that in a fit of anger, she had almost lost her composure. She angrily glared at Jiang Ruan. A puff came from the nearby Lin Zixiang, who couldn't help but laugh. Feeling insulted, Rongya Junju could no longer bear to stay. She abruptly stood up and shouted, "You are all here to bully me, right? Then I'll leave now." She fled, full of indignation. As soon as Rongya Junju left, all the noble young ladies who were friendly with Rongya Junju also said their goodbyes until only a small group were left. Dong Yinger wanted to call them back, but Lin Zixiang stopped her. "Let them go. Really harping on about this and that, they're just rushing to give empty flattery. So annoying. And you also, why would you invite someone like that?" Dong Yinger sighed. She wasn't nearly as straightforward as Lin Zixiang. The capital magistrate had to deal with a variety of issues every day, and everything had to be done perfectly. So, if Lin Zixiang was said to have inherited Chief Historian Lin's impartial and reproachful personality, then Dong Yinger had taken after Dong Darren's evasive and smooth manner. Dong Yinger, known for being lively, cute, and considerate, had an outstanding reputation among the noble ladies of the capital. Thus everyone was willing to give her face. Zhao Jin also persuaded her. "There's nothing to be afraid of. A princess left, but there's another one still here. It can't be that you think we can't finish the snacks." Now Dong Yinger couldn't help laughing out loud. She laughed but slowly frowned again. When Fei Fei looked at her, "Why are you unhappy again? Ruan Mimi is finally back. Just throw those annoying thoughts somewhere else." "What's wrong, Yinger Jiejie?" Jiang Ruan asked with a smile. "What else can it be? Isn't it the marriage with the Chong family?" Lin Zixiang replied. "The Chong family is one of the capital's better families." Jiang Ruan smiled softly. "Besides, your childhood sweethearts. There's nothing unpleasant about it." But Dong Yinger said irritably, "I don't want to marry yet." "What are you talking about?" Zhao Jin said. "Usually you say that we're going to be old spinsters if we don't marry soon, but now you're dragging your feet. Are you feeling shy?" "I said it's not that," Dong Yinger stated again. "I just don't want to marry yet." Looking at Dong Yinger's expression, despite being soon to be married, there wasn't a hint of the usual matrimonial shyness. This shouldn't be the case, unless her heart didn't consider that person at all. This was somewhat different from Jiang Ruan's past life. She thought a bit, then said, "Is Yinger Jiejie dissatisfied with young Master Chong? Or did young Master Chong make you angry?" Dong Yinger hesitated, then shook her head. Chong'an was indeed her childhood sweetheart. She thought they would live like that for a lifetime, and there wasn't anything bad about that. But after seeing that heavenly man 3 years ago, she'd never considered anyone else. Only then did she understand that what she felt towards Chong and wasn't anything close to love. Dong Yinger's unsettled appearance made Jiang Ruan think. Could it be that Dong Yinger liked another person? Looking at her upturned lips, she must have thought of someone just now. Wasn't that the shyness of a girl in love? Her heart shook. Why is this different from her past life? Like she suddenly thought of something, Dong Yinger turned to Jiang Ruan and asked, seemingly casually, "Ruan Mimi, your elder brother has won so many battles in succession. Has he sent word on when he'll be back?" Jiang Ruan was startled. and next to her she failed to notice that Zhao Jin's expression had become strange. Her body stiffened. She looked towards Dong Yinger, wanting to confirm her thoughts. Dong Yinger looked back at her with shining eyes that couldn't hide their hope. Such a gaze was too familiar. In her past life, that was the expression she saw in the bronze mirror every day. It was the gaze of someone longing for the one in their heart. The one in Dong Yinger's heart was Jiang Xing. This life generally followed her past life's trend. But some things had changed ever since her return. For example, the Dong Yinger before her who, in the past, dearly loved Chang'an, actually fell in love with Jiang Xing. Now that this matter had changed, what about other things? Seeing Jiang Ruan in a daze, Lin Zixiang gave her a couple pokes. What are you thinking about? Why don't you reply? Oh, Jiang Ruan said with a smile. Nothing, Dage hasn't sent any letters. Jiang Ruan caught sight of the disappointment in Dong Yinger's eyes, and became sure of her conjecture. For some reason, an ominous premonition arose in her heart. It came on so inexplicably that even she could not make sense of it. Lin Zixiang frowned. If Yinger marries, it'll be my turn soon. Recently my father always asks me about these things. I really don't know what to do. Jiang Ruan pondered for a moment, then chuckled. Has Lin Darren let any news slip? Lin Zixiang was never someone who cared about society's niceties, and wasn't coy at all. Nothing like that, only he keeps frowning, so it's probably not going well. I said so earlier that with my personality, it's going to be hard to find someone whose household matches my status, and also has a tolerant personality. Jiang Ruan's brows slowly furrowed. Chapter 111. One Slander, Part 1. Chapter 111. Slander, Part 1. Jianan was covered with snow year-round. The mountain was high and its valley was deep. It was already summer, but only a patch of ice had started to melt. Water, mixed with broken ice, slowly flowed down the mountain in a stream, scouring brightly colored pebbles on both sides of its bank. The pine forest was covered with sparkling ice crystals. At first glance, the scenery was like that of the north. Xiao Xiao passed an array of plum blossoms at the foot of the mountain on his way up towards the Luyang villa that sat at the mountain top. The array was the formation that teacher Ba Qi personally laid out. It had a total of 8 loops, arranged from the foot of the mountain to its peak. Except for the sect disciples, outsiders could not break the formation. Xiao Xiao had been here many times and was familiar with the road. Just as he entered the gate outside the Luyang villa, the large green parrot kept at the doorway started to flap its wings and screech loudly. Someone is coming. Someone is coming. Unlike the scenery on Jianan, Luyang villa was filled with birds and flowers. All kinds of flowers were blooming just like in early spring. Xiao Xiao walked in. The huge villa was renovated exquisitely, but at the moment nobody seemed to be present. After a brief moment, a deep voice came from the courtyard. Ah Xiao. That voice, as mellifluous as a bell, was close to his ears. But when he listened more carefully, it was vague and faint as if it came from a faraway place. Xiao Xiao walked towards the courtyard. Under a pear tree, a white-bearded old man in a gray shirt sat in front of a chess table, holding a box of chess pieces in his hands. Master. Xiao Xiao walked over to him. The old man in gray was teacher Ba Qi, now in his 70s, and he had the appearance of a sage with astute and wise eyes. Without raising his head, he studied the chess game in front of him. Are you back from South Xinjiang? Yes. Xiao Xiao answered. After coming back from South Xinjiang, he had been busy handling all kinds of things and teacher Ba Qi was also in seclusion. But now that he had found the opportunity to go to Jianan by chance, teacher Ba Qi had also come out of his seclusion. Teacher Ba Qi put down the chess box and finally raised his head. Teacher Ba Qi accepted a total of 8 disciples and Xiao Xiao ranked 3rd among them. At that time when Xiao Xiao first went up the mountain, he was just a withdrawn and taciturn teenager. He came together with Guanliang Han. Guanliang Han studied battle formations while Xiao Xiao learned Qi Huang's inner classic. However, within a few years, the old Jining Wang and his wife met with a mishap and Xiao Xiao became even more desolate. He took the initiative to ask teacher Ba Qi to stop teaching him medical skills and only studied the art of assassination from then on. Xiao Xiao was extremely talented. He showed a disposition for practicing martial arts, and it seemed as though killing people was very easy for him. After he finished learning, in his first year down the mountain, he penetrated South Xinjiang alone and at that time decapitated South Xinjiang's leader. He was cold and fearless. He killed with a blade in hand without any concern. There was no man in the world better suited to be a killer than Xiao Xiao, but teacher Ba Qi only remarked, Xiao, you are not meant to be the best assassin in the world. What the heart wishes, the hand accomplishes skilled at the job / entirely in one's element / going smoothly and easily. Xiao Xiao asked why. Teacher Ba Qi replied, because you're not cold-blooded enough. Xiao Xiao was the most caring person. Teacher Ba Qi could clearly see that among the 8 fellow disciples, although Xiao Xiao usually seemed quite cold, he would look after them most of the time. An upright man must not be a killer. Xiao Xiao wasn't cut out to be one. Teacher Ba Qi looked at Xiao Xiao for a while and suddenly asked Xiao, have you met any special person over the past few years? When Xiao Xiao left the capital 3 years ago, teacher Ba Qi was in seclusion, so he was unable to bid his master farewell. Speaking of which, the master and disciple had actually not seen each other for more than 3 years. Xiao Xiao thought for a moment. No. Think about it carefully. Teacher Ba Qi asked again. Xiao Xiao frowned slightly. The word special didn't exist in his life. He had met countless people in the past 3 years, and naturally he had no idea who teacher Ba Qi meant. Master, what are you trying to say? Xiao Xiao asked. Teacher Ba Qi stroked his long white beard. 3 years ago, before going into seclusion, I calculated the hexagrams for you. The person who will change your fate should have already appeared. Who is that person? Xiao Xiao asked. This person is here for revenge and for paying back the debt of gratitude, such is the cycle of life and death. Those who live will die, and those who die will live again. She can clearly see everything that happens in the world. Destiny has changed because of her. I don't know whether it is a blessing or a curse. Sheng 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 Si 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 Sheng Sheng. An alternating cycle of life and death. Life represents the new future, and will also become the past of the future. Death symbolizes the past, but that is the future of the past. T/N. The pronouns in Chinese are gender neutral, so we are using she to represent JR. But in general it could be read as he, she, hence excesses confusion. Xiao Xiao was silent. Teacher Ba Qi's words were too vague for him to understand. After thinking for a while he spoke. What does this have to do with me? Teacher Ba Qi looked slightly contemplative. Your life and hers are intertwined. The beginning and the end are due to the relationship between cause and effect. Because of her appearance, you will be freed from the fate of a desolate life. But the fate to become the monarch, the Ziwei Emperor Star 6, has fallen from the sky. You will lose your fate as the emperor for her sake. 6. Ziweigong. Ziwei Emperor Star, North Star in 1100 BC Ancient China, a symbol of the emperor in the human world. If the words that were just spoken were spread out, one would immediately be beheaded. However, no other souls were in the Luyang villa. Thus, teacher Ba Qi spoke leisurely and Xiao Xiao listened open-mindedly. I understand, Xiao Xiao answered. The emperor's fate was useless to him and he had never eyed that position, so his expression did not change a bit after teacher Ba Qi finished speaking. Teacher Ba Qi sighed. She has already appeared. Xiao Xiao frowned slightly. However, teacher Ba Qi had never explained divinations clearly. It's because the mysteries of heaven must not be revealed. Those who divulge too many mysteries known only to heaven would suffer retributions. Teacher Ba Qi continued, according to the divination, I will have the chance to meet her. When I finally meet her at that time, the cause and effect of this person's past life will come into being. He paused as if he still had something else to say, but ultimately spoke no further and only looked at Xiao Xiao. South Xinjiang's goo poison is fierce. Did you get infected? No, replied Xiao Xiao. I still have master's antidote. When Xiao Xiao said this, gratitude towards teacher Ba Qi emerged in his heart. At that time, he was bent on learning assassination and wanted to abandon studying Qi Huang's inner classic. It was teacher Ba Qi who personally refused. He taught him not to waste his skills. Since ancient times, no assassin had ever studied medicine. Nobody had ever heard a story of how assassins also saved people. Nowadays, his missions were dangerous and he always faced precarious and risky things. Having medical skills handy had been a source of convenience throughout his journeys over the years. 7. Daokatian Shua. Licking blood at the edge of the blade, implying dangerous and cruel. Teacher Bachi smiled. It's still early. Since you're here, let's play a game first. With a gentle flick of his sleeve, all the chess pieces on the chessboard flew into the chess box neatly. Not a single one fell off. Teacher Bachi took the white piece while Xiao Xiao took the black one. They put down the pieces at the same time. I've cautioned you before. Seize the opportunity. Teacher Bachi's voice came from afar. The song of cicadas in the summer afternoon was so noisy that people couldn't have a good rest. Several third-rank maidservants climbed on the trees in the courtyard to catch them. After eating chilled sherbet one night, Jiang Ruan heard Lu Zhu come over to speak. Miss, old Marquis Xia and 8th Prince are visiting the Fu. Master is asking you to accompany the ladies for a chat. Xia Cheng had not visited the Jiang Fu since the ancestral hall incident. What happened to Xia Jun was a thorn in the Xia family's heart. Jiang Ruan had been away from the capital for 3 years. From what she heard from Lu Zhu, it seemed several women from the Xia family had also come. Xia Jiao and Xia Jun hated Jiang Ruan as a thorn in their side, but since they had gone so far as to step into the Jiang Fu again, the relationship between the Jiang and the Xia family seemed to have eased in the past 3 years. Lu Zhu spoke anxiously. What does Master mean by this? If it's merely to accompany them for a chat, there's Furen. What can Miss do there? Is it possible to get along well with the Xia family? Jiang Ruan shook her head. There's no harm in doing so. Tianzhu, how is that physician doing now? Xia Yan sent people to chase and kill him. This subordinate rescued him, and now he is being held in a storehouse inside my people's courtyard. Miss needs him? Get ready. Jiang Ruan stood up. Today she has asked the Xia family to come. It just so happens that I have been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Chapter 111. To Slander Part 2. Chapter 111. Slander Part 2. In the main hall, Jiang Quan was talking with Xian Li and Xia Cheng. Xian Li had worked diligently over these past few years, making outstanding achievements and always conducting himself with integrity. The emperor, previously indignant due to Li An's matter, gradually changed his attitude towards him. In addition, Imperial Consort Chun catered to the emperor and became even more favored. As 5th Prince gradually fell at a disadvantage during this time, Xian Li's voice became even more prominent. The Crown Prince had made many mistakes and the statute to depose the Crown Prince was about to be proposed sooner than later. Therefore, the matter of changing the Crown Prince had become a major worry for court officials. Those who could choose sides had already done so. Needless to say, the Xia and the Jiang families were on 8th Prince's side. Xian Li smiled gently. His words were modest yet ambitious. Xia Cheng and Jiang Quan felt increasingly convinced of their choice. Xian Li had the talent for statesmanship. Soon he would be the only ruler in the world. Meanwhile, Xia Yan was talking with Shunrou, the Xia family's eldest mistress. Shunrou looked at Xia Yan's belly and said with a smile, "Younger sister-in-law's pregnant belly is becoming more noticeable. When I was pregnant with Jiao Jiao, mine wasn't so big. Perhaps you're having twins." Xia Yan's face froze and in her heart she gave a bitter laugh. What twins? Her child had already died. How did this talk of twins come about? Whenever she recalled her miscarriage that night, Xia Yan wanted to tear Hong Ying and Jiang Ruan to pieces. Although it was not known how the 2 bolts of Chouyu silk were swapped, she was certain that those 2 women must have tampered with them. Xia Yan's eyes flashed. Go on, laugh. She would let them laugh. Later on, they wouldn't even be able to cry. Even though Shunrou had already borne children, her appearance had become even more beautiful and voluptuous, having the air of a young woman. In contrast, Xia Yan, who had just recently suffered a miscarriage, looked sallow as if she had drastically aged overnight. Shunrou looked at Xia Yan suspiciously. Xia Yan should have been living well in the Jiangfu now, yet she looked so haggard. None of her past elegance and indifferent appearance remained. Shen Rou remembered the rumor that Zhang Quan currently preferred the Fuxinyang who came from a brothel, and concluded that Xia Yan couldn't keep a hold on her man's heart. Shen Rou couldn't stand Xia Yan's lofty and magnanimous looks. Thus she comforted her on the surface but gloated inwardly. A young woman seated on the other side suddenly spoke. Why hasn't Zhang Ruan arrived yet? Is this how the Jiangfu treats guests? The girl was dressed in a light purple cloud pattern moire crepe silk gown and a smoky butterfly skirt. She was beautiful. Her face was like a flower and her features like the moon. But it was a pity that she was short-tempered. This was Xia Jiao, Shen Rou's daughter from the Xia's eldest son. This Junju didn't receive Foreign's invitation earlier, nor did she hear that she must come to give people company. If you don't know that guests are coming, how can you treat them with hospitality? The voice came from outside the door. Several people in the room looked up and saw Zhang Ruan coming leisurely. Xia Jiao bit her lower lip tensely. Her eyes were fixed on Zhang Ruan, who was dressed in a simple Suzhou embroideries Yuehua brocade jacket. Her skin was fairer than snow with red lips and white teeth as well as a pair of alluring eyes. Xia Jiao's beauty originally could be rated at 7 points, but when compared with Zhang Ruan she was barely a 1. Xia Jiao was exasperated. What made her even angrier was Zhang Ruan's ridicule. Firstly, it was true that they had come without sending out an invite, and secondly, they had not made a request for Zhang Ruan to keep them company. So for them to criticize her for her late arrival was quite preposterous. Ruan, you are here. Jiao has wanted to meet you for a long time. Xia Yan smiled and changed the topic while complaining inwardly. She previously thought that it would take some effort to invite Zhang Ruan to come out. Thus, she had come up with many different reasons that would ensure that Zhang Ruan would come, but before she could make use of any of them, Zhang Ruan had agreed to make an appearance. Nonetheless, this certainly facilitated her next move. Xia Jiao curled her lips, not caring about Xia Yan's words. Shen Rou was also examining Zhang Ruan carefully. When Zhang Ruan came to the Xiaofu, she only thought Zhang Ruan was an easy-to-handle orphan girl. However, it was precisely this girl, who had appeared to be easily manipulated, that unexpectedly caused Xia Jun to suffer a loss. Now she had transformed anew and become a Junju. She heard that Zhang Ruan had won the Empress Dowager's favor, and should have also been rewarded with a lot of silver. Shen Rou started scheming in her heart. Xia Cheng intended Zhang Ruan for Xia Jun. On one hand, Xia Jun was bitter about what had happened and had vowed over the previous years to marry Zhang Ruan to torture her. On the other hand, Zhang Ruan had a strong backer. Whoever married her would receive great assistance and might also gain a generous amount of silver. However, Shen Rou had always had difficulties dealing with Yuya, the second mistress of the Xiao family. The relationship between the two was very poor. Naturally, she didn't want Xia Jun to have a good life. Shen Rou thought, rather than giving an advantage to Xia Jun, it would be better to let her own brother benefit. Shen Rou's maternal family also had a nephew whose age was suitable to marry Zhang Ruan. If it was successful, it would be regarded as keeping all benefits within the family. Fei Shui Bu Liu Warentian lit. Don't let one's own fertile water flow into others' field. Figure reserving the best stuff to be kept within the family, proverb. While Shen Rou was still making the plan, her gaze towards Zhang Ruan was filled with surprising enthusiasm. Tianzhu frowned. Zhang Ruan gave a faint smile. You should be eldest Xia Foreign. Exactly. Ruan, I didn't expect you to grow up in a blink of an eye. Shen Rou replied warmly. Impudence. You didn't bow when meeting Junju. Tianzhu shouted with a grim face, startling Shen Rou. Zhang Ruan spoke gently. It doesn't matter. Eldest Xia Foreign and I met once. I think she was too excited just now. Forget it, there's no harm done. This answer instantly caused the blood to drain from Shen Rou's face before indignancy caused it to flush red again. Everyone still remembered the mishap involving Zhang Ruan in the ancestral hall. So to have this old score brought up again, it was essentially an insulting slap on the Xia family's face. Xia Yan was very embarrassed. Xia Jiao's lungs nearly burst with anger. However, when she recalled her grandfather's instructions before she left, she restrained herself. Xia Yan suddenly bent down, covered her mouth with a handkerchief and retched twice. Lin Lang came hurriedly and gently patted Xia Yan on the back. "Foreign, are you feeling unwell again?" Xia Yan shook her head. "Perhaps it's because this room is too stuffy. I feel a bit suffocated in my chest." She smiled. "Jiao Jiao, eldest sister-in-law Ruaner, why don't we stroll around the garden? The air outside is fresh." Zhang Ruan looked out of the window. It was a cloudless and hot day. Going out at this time of day would result in a breakout of heat rash, but she smiled and said, "Yes, it just so happens that I want to stroll in the garden too." Shen Rou and Xia Jiao Jiao were guests. Naturally, they wouldn't refuse. The three of them stood up and walked towards Yan Huayuan's garden. To be honest, although the weather was sizzling hot outside, Xia Yan didn't dare to use ice because she was pregnant. So, she had no other alternative but to make an excuse to go into the courtyard. The courtyard was clean and tidy. Every hour, someone would haul cold water from the well and sprinkle it on the stone slab, and with the shade from the trees, the courtyard was somewhat cooler. Compared to being in the room, this was much more refreshing. As they walked, they reached a pavilion next to the small pond in the courtyard. This pavilion was Xia Yan's proudest work. Xia Yan was once revered as a talented woman in the capital. After entering the Jiangfu, she renovated the courtyard herself. The pavilion was next to the pond, and in summer it epitomized the moonlight over the lotus pond scenery. The cool wind blew gently on the summer's night, and with green lotus leaves filling the pond alongside the beautiful lotus flowers, the addition of moonlight reflecting on the water made the scenery look extremely elegant. After the pavilion was renovated, Jiang Quan loved it very much. He often had a drink with Xia Yan in the pavilion at night. A loving couple indeed. Jiang Ruan sneered silently in her heart. This was the place where Jiang Quan and Xia Yan's affection began. However, it was also the place where Zhao Mei's heart was broken. When Jiang Xing was young, he contracted smallpox. Zhao Mei relentlessly guarded Jiang Xing for days and nights. After Jiang Xing woke up, he asked where his father was. Zhao Mei's heart was full of grievance, so she had gone seeking out Jiang Quan, only to find him drinking and making merry with Xia Yan. At that time, Jiang Ruan was still a child who didn't understand anything. However, upon seeing Jiang Quan and Xia Yan laughing happily, she understood the source of her mother's tears even more acutely. Jiang Ruan looked at the pavilion and spoke with a faint smile. Silk skirt with lotus leaf patterns of a pure color and good cut. Lotus flowers bloom on both sides of the picker's face. Song of Picking Lotus Seeds, Wang Chongling, taken from this blog. Poetry Chinese. Picking lotus seed pods. Chinese has a long tradition of picking the lotus seeds, apparently for a healthy recipe. This tradition has evolved into a culture, which has hatched many symbolic chicks. Lotus is grown mostly in the southern part of China, or the watery region, where the girls are said to be watery and spiritful, quick-witted. For the image-loving ancient scholars, the girls in bright colors amid the green leaves and pinkish-white flowers provide a palateful sight, and it is not surprising for them to write songs. When Zhao Mei came to Yan Huayuan with the young Jiang Ruan, she heard the confident and debonair Jiang Quan proudly reciting these lines to the gentle and graceful Xia Yan. The tenderness and affection in his eyes was something that neither of them had ever seen before. Xia Yan was slightly stunned and then smiled. "Ruaner, your father likes to recite these two lines the most." Shen Rou rolled her eyes then grinned. "I'd say younger sister-in-law really knows how to enjoy life. Such a good place is hard to find in our Fu." Xia Jiao Jiao chimed in. Of course, Aunt was once one of the capital's most talented women. Naturally, she could not be compared with a common wild girl. Xia Jiao Jiao's had always believed that since Jiang Ruan had grown up in the countryside, and her childhood was spent beside Zhao Mei who wasn't proficient in poetry, it was natural that she would be uncultured and illiterate. Jiang Ruan acted as if she didn't hear her. She still had a faint smile on her face. When Xia Jiao Jiao saw it, her heart got even more irritated. Xia Yan suddenly became a little sentimental. It has been more than 10 years in the blink of an eye. When Jiejie was still around, she also praised the beauty of the pavilion. "Ruaner, now that you've grown up, you have almost reached the age to talk about your marriage. Since you were raised in the rural residence, I'm afraid that no one has properly taught you proper etiquette and deportment. So is it all right if mother looks for an etiquette momo for you?" Jiang Ruan turned her head and fixed her gaze at her, then suddenly said with a smile, "What are you talking about, mother? Is the Momo around Empress Dowager not a proper one?" Xia Yin was stunned. She had not taken this point into consideration, and was suddenly at a loss for words. However, since she had already started, she couldn't help but continue. She grabbed Jiang Ruan's hand and advised her gently, "Mother knows that you are good and smart, but the Momo inside the palace only teaches you the rules of the palace." Xia Yin screamed. Her lower body was immediately dyed red, and her clothes were soaked with blood. "Jiang Ruan!" An angry and frightened voice came from the opposite side. Jiang Ruan looked up and saw Jiang Quan, Xia Cheng and Xianli standing opposite the pavilion. Jiang Quan's eyes were vicious and indignant as if he were going to eat her alive. Jiang Ruan stroked the bracelet on her hand, and her lips curved into a mysterious smile. The turtle had just stuck its neck out. Chapter 112. One Frantic, Part 1. Chapter 112. Frantic, Part 1. "Why are you just standing there? Hurry up and get a midwife." Jiang Quan hurried forward and saw Xia Yan's lower body stained with blood. Without any thought, he raised his hand and gave Jiang Ruan a vicious slap across her face. Pa rang out, causing all who heard it to jump in fright. Jiang Quan had a heavy hand, and immediately the distinctive print of his 5 fingers appeared on Jiang Ruan's fair face. Simultaneously her face began to swell and blood spilled out from the corner of her lips. Jiang Quan was flabbergasted. While he had rashly used his hand in a fit of anger, he had not expected Jiang Ruan to merely stand there unmoving and steadfastly withstand the slap. Meanwhile, a flash of elation appeared in Xia Jiaojiao's eyes, while Xianli, who had rushed over upon hearing the news, silently knitted his brows. Jiang Ruan took a handkerchief from her bosom to wipe the blood on her lips and placidly said, "Has father's temper cooled down now? To publicly harm anyone from the imperial family was definitely disrespectful." Jiang Quan was dumbfounded and without words. He looked at Xia Yan, who seemed to be at her last breath, and at once his fury rose again. Pointing at Jiang Ruan's nose, he cursed, "Evil girl. With such a malevolent heart, you dare to blatantly plot to murder the first wife. Utterly preposterous and deranged." Xia Cheng, who had accompanied Xianli, was naturally very pleased with the scene before him. He had harbored great hatred towards Jiang Ruan back when she had plotted against the Xia family's only grandson, Xia Jun, so he was naturally happy to behold Jiang Ruan's stricken state. In fact, he wasn't really concerned about his daughter's safety. However, to be presented with such a scenario, and before Xianli's presence, naturally he had to put in a few perfunctory words. Thus insincerely he remarked, "Son-in-law, I'm sure your Ruan girl didn't do it on purpose. Perhaps there has been some misunderstanding?" "That's right," Jiang Ruan quietly added. "Why doesn't father ask mother? As maybe there has been some misunderstanding. In addition, how did you conclude that I had intentionally pushed mother? That said, if father's anger has still not been appeased, I am willing to let father slap me a few more times." Her words were without any inflection, and her beautiful eyes did not even reveal an iota of emotion, almost as if the earlier slap had merely been an illusion. Xia Jiaojiao had expected to see a downtrodden Jiang Ruan, but what she couldn't believe was that up till this point, Jiang Ruan was still her usual composed and serene self. She could not stop herself from gritting her teeth. Xianli thoughtfully looked towards Jiang Ruan. This type of a girl, to be able to conceal her expressions and emotions, isn't she extremely special? At Jiang Ruan's words, it became clearly evident that Jiang Quan's earlier outburst was without justification. This allowed for the people who had come with Xianli to reflect on the incident. No matter what, this Jiang family's daughter was bestowed by the Empress Dowager herself as Hong and Junju. So how come her status within the Fu was so low? Listening to Jiang Ruan's meaning behind her words, did it not imply that she was normally used as Jiang Quan's punching bag? Wasn't Jiang Quan blatantly slighting the imperial family? Jiang Quan was further enraged, and was about to give another slap, but with the large audience present, he could only hold back as he blustered, "You still dare to quibble?" Jiang Ruan grinned, "Why won't father ask mother? The victim is right before you." A group of old maidservants had hurried over upon hearing the news and were about to take Xia Yan away. When they heard what was said, they stopped their movements. Xia Yan's heart was full of hatred as Zhang Ruan's words were spot on. Based on Xia Yan's usual amiable and magnanimous attitude, it was obvious that she had to say that Zhang Ruan had not intentionally committed the act. But if she were to say as such, wouldn't that pardon Zhang Ruan of the entire situation? When her thoughts arrived at this point, she painfully moaned out 2 words, "It hurts." As a result, the old maidservants did not tarry any further, and immediately carried Xia Yan back to her room. Zhang Quan took in the current situation without any further ado. He too followed quickly after Xia Yan. The Xia family naturally wanted to watch the excitement, and Xianli stayed as well. Since all the relevant people were gathered and accounted for, Zhang Ruan naturally would not be left behind, and so she too followed suit. When Tianzhu passed by Zhang Ruan, she was somewhat worried when she saw the injury on Zhang Ruan's face. Zhang Ruan merely shook her head, so Tianzhu could only lower her head and pretend to be unaware. When the small posse of people arrived at Xia Yan's house, Xia Yan was already in her room and was with the requested midwife. Intermittently there was the sound of Xia Yan screeching, which caused the congregated people's hearts to be scared witless. When Secondine Yang heard about the incident, she brought Zhang Li over to take delight in Xia Yan's misfortune, while Zhang Susu and Hong Ying had also rushed over. Zhang Dan, on the other hand, merely stayed in her own courtyard. Hong Ying noticed the injury on Zhang Ruan's face after she heard from the servants that Zhang Quan had given Zhang Ruan a slap. However, she had not expected the injury to be that severe and was taken aback. Noticing Zhang Quan's volatile manner, she hurried forward to quietly comfort in undertones. Under Hong Ying's gentle consolation, Zhang Quan's dark expression receded slightly, but when he gazed toward the room, he became very concerned. After all, she was someone he had once loved, so the heartache and anxiousness was genuine. Zhang Susu was naturally in a towering rage. These past few days made her restrain her temper, and so she did not react as Zhang Quan had done, but her eyes simmered with unadulterated malice and hatred. Zhang Li and Secondine Yang were the happiest. Zhang Li said to Zhang Ruan, "Dejejia, how could you push mother like that? If our little brother were to be lost, mother would be extremely heartbroken." When Zhang Quan heard these words, his fury began to rise further towards Zhang Ruan once again. But then at that moment, the room's door was suddenly opened and an exhausted midwife walked out. Lin Lang and Fei Chui looked towards Zhang Quan, and without a word, they both fell to their knees crying, "Master Furen has miscarried." Zhang Quan reacted to the news as if he was struck by lightning, staggering back a couple of steps, as he uttered a distressed, "What?" The midwife shook her head with regret. "Master, there was nothing this servant could have done, it was a young master." Zhang Quan looked back, casting an enraged look at Zhang Ruan. Suddenly, again he raised his hand and was about to high-handedly give another slap as he roared, "You murdering girl, you've killed your own brother." A loud pa rang, but this time the slap did not land on Zhang Ruan's face. Tianzhu was not able to retaliate, but at the critical moment, she stood in front of Zhang Ruan and took the slap on her behalf. Zhang Quan was infuriated. "Who do you think you are? Servants, take this wicked servant out and beat her to death." "That's enough," Zhang Ruan coldly said. "Father, you have not even clarified the situation, yet you would blatantly disregard a human life in the presence of His Royal Highness, 8th Prince." Since she had pointed him out, obviously Xianli could no longer remain a bystander. Moreover, Xianli was someone who paid attention to his reputation, so he had to put on the role of investigating in detail. "That's right. I would advise Zhang Darren to gather all the information and find out all of the details of this matter before taking any definitive action." Ming Cha Cho Hao. Mencius idiom lit. Seeing clearly the downy feathers of autumn. Fig perceptive of even the finest detail. What more is there for Dejejia to say? Jiang Susu glowered. Presently, her beauty was beyond that of the past, and even her intelligence had improved. She would no longer unequivocally rely on just her beauty. Her eyes were reddened, as if she was valiantly holding back her tears, yet her voice was choked with emotions as she pressed on. Is Dejejia trying to say that mother would intentionally cause the loss of her own flesh and blood? On seeing such a beauty look so pitiful, Xianli mildly consoled. Second Zhang miss, please do not grieve overtly. Zhang Ruan answered with a question. And why is that not possible? Master. Do I look insane? Xia Yan was aghast. How could I harm my own child? And what benefit is it to me to implicate you? Naturally there are benefits. Zhang Ruan grinned, to not only lose a child prior to knowing if it's a boy or girl, but to be able to use the loss to implicate me. Furthermore, with mother instigating the charge, father is bound to be infuriated. And should this matter circulate out, then Ruan Yang's reputation would be smeared for the rest of her life, and if I was brought to court, then I would have to pay for it with my life. Dage is currently at the borders, and if he became aware of Ruan Yang's situation, then his state of mind would be in dishevel. Furthermore, it would be best if something were to happen to him while in that state. This way, the whole Jiangfu and its establishment could only land into the hands of second brother. Surely mother can follow the trail of clues, and would be able to instigate a connection between Ruan Yang and 15 Yang simply by arranging for people to verify. Then, in that case, I'm afraid that even 15 Yang could not escape this calamity. Zhang Ruan warmly smiled, mother, to take actions such as these, however way you look at it, it would definitely be worthwhile, right? Shunting emogua. Lit. To follow the vine to get to the melon. Fig to track something following clues. The audience looked at her dumbfounded. Zhang Ruan's speech was very direct and revealing, without any trace of subterfuge. There weren't many people in the world who would be so brazen as to speak as such, not even leaving a stitch of cloth covering but totally exposing the truth outright. Xia Yan was momentarily left flabbergasted, as if she had suffered immense shame and humiliation. Pointing her finger at Zhang Ruan, I've never entertained such thoughts. She frantically looked towards Zhang Quan, master. I have never entertained such thoughts. Zhang Quan softly reassured. I naturally know that you're not that kind of a person. He turned towards Zhang Ruan. His expression flew from humiliation to rage. Evil daughter, you've gone so far to the extent of knowing no shame. The young lady of the Jiangfu is really audacious, Xia Cheng exclaimed. Today, this old man cannot bear to see this carry on. Servants take away this malicious girl, who not only refused to admit to her malevolent misdemeanor of her mother, but in turn brazenly slandered against her. Who dares make a move? Zhang Ruan raised her voice. Her red dress was like fire, but her eyes were like sharp swords quenched by ice. The coldness of that moment caused everyone around her to tremble. There was the feeling of the devil rising from hell demanding for someone's life, and her eyes were resolute and awe-inspiring. She wasn't vexed but smiled instead as she addressed Xia Cheng. Marquis Xia, with regards to family matters, you are a Xia, so how did it come about for you to interfere with the Zhang family matters? And if it is regarding matters pertaining to the country, then upon meeting me, you ought to address me as Jun Zhu. The hierarchy between us two aren't equally matched. So are you intending to disregard the reputation of the Empress Dowager, to utterly seize the authority of His Majesty? Each question was strict and piercing to the point that Xia Cheng was left dumbfounded and speechless. Zhang Ruan flippantly turned to Xianli saying, since His Royal Highness, 8th Prince is here, then he also represents His Majesty, so would Your Highness be willing to stand witness? Xianli warmly replied, it would be my pleasure. Seeing this play now, he really couldn't see the possibility of Zhang Ruan turning defeat into victory. However, he still maintained an equitable facade. Wouldn't it be interesting to see a little ant struggling to survive in the sea of flames? What's your intention? Zhang Quan sternly questioned. Since father does not deign to trust me, then there is nothing I can say to that. I think that it's mother who has poisoned the unborn child in her womb in order to frame me. So I request Your Highness to have people search the various courtyards. If they are able to find any medical herbs that could induce a miscarriage, then we will have physical evidence. Xia Yan was about to burst out laughing. Zhang Ruan had thought herself to be so clever, but where would there be any medicine for abortion to be found? Even if they searched the whole Yanhua Yuan inside out, they wouldn't find anything. She fixed her eyes on Zhang Ruan, not wanting to miss any of her expression as she bit out, what happens if nothing can be found? Then I will admit to the charges and have father send me to the court to be dealt with. Would this be acceptable for mother? Zhang Ruan stated. Okay. Xia Yan agreed through clenched teeth. Then that's settled then. Chapter 112. Too Frantic, Part 2. Chapter 112. Frantic, Part 2. Xia Yan knitted her brows, sensing that something was amiss. However, spoken words were like spilled water, and there was no other option at this point. Jiang Susu walked to stand before Xian Li, bestowing him a full curtsy, begging that Your Highness would preside over this matter. Xian Li reached out to support Jiang Susu up. In the past he had never paid her any attention, but at this moment a beauty was right before his eyes, her every movement captivating and mesmerizing, and her natural features evoked feelings of pity. Xian Li could not help revealing a sliver of surprise. His voice gentled in reply, "This prince will not be remiss in doing his honor-bound duty." After saying this, he gave orders to his chief guard. "All of you go. Investigate, be thorough in your search." Looking at those two people standing together, Zhang Ruan couldn't help the disgust that arose in her heart. In order to show impartiality, please take both mothers and my personal maids along. Furthermore, we shouldn't restrict the search to mother's courtyard but search all the courtyards in the Fu. What do you think? Xian Li was taken aback but smiled. Naturally, that's for the best. Very quickly the guards began their search, while the atmosphere within the hall grew frantic. Xia Jiao hid behind Shen Ro, her eyes revealing her delight in the other's misfortune. At the mere thought of Jiang Ruan being dragged off to court, her reputation destroyed, Xia Jiao could not resist smiling in delight. Jiang Susu stood beside Xian Li, intermittently lifting her head to gaze at him. Xian Li smiled back at her in consolation, the two of them together depicting a picture of a concerned loving couple. Jiang Li gnashed her teeth as she silently cursed Jiang Susu for being a vixen. Her own mother had just lost a child, and yet she still had the heart to seduce a man. Jiang Quan softly consoled Xia Yan, who was nestled in his arms and neglected to notice the aggrieved look in Hong Ying's eyes. Second, Yang looked at Hong Ying's abdomen and thought that if her baby were to be lost too, that would indeed be the best outcome. Xia Cheng's attention was transfixed on Zhang Ruan. The more Zhang Ruan was calm and collected, the more his heart felt an increasing sense of unease. He was a stately marquis, and in all his years he couldn't believe that he would feel an impending sense of fear all because of a mere girl. If this was known to others, that would indeed be the joke of the day. However, back then at the Xia family's ancestral hall, Xia Cheng had personally experienced Zhang Ruan's strategic manipulation. And now, moving forward 3 years, Zhang Ruan's schemes and machinations could only have become more profound and intricate when compared to before. So how could he not be afraid? Time seemed to pass by quietly, but it wasn't long before one of Xian Li's guards returned to the hall after completing his search, followed by Lin Lang and Tianzhu in the rear. Xian Li asked, "Did you find any medication?" "To answer, Your Highness, there was none," the chief guard answered. Hearing this, tears streamed down Xia Yan's face. "Ruana, what more can you say for yourself?" "What more is there to say? Obviously it's to have her dragged off to court." Xia Jiao immediately responded, "This kind of poisonous heart. Your Highness will need to do right by my aunt and my dead cousin." "Evil daughter, aren't you going to admit your sins now?" Zhang Quan bellowed. At the very same time that he saw Zhang Ruan smile, Xia Cheng noticed that the blood had drained from Lin Lang's face, and he felt as though he heard a kaboom drop in his heart. Before he could utter a word, he heard Tianzhu coldly state, "Master, while we didn't discover any abortion medication in Foreign's courtyard, we managed to find this. Please take a look." Then she presented something with both hands. Xia Yan was stricken with horror once she saw the items. It was an article of clothing and a pair of light green boots. At a glance, there was nothing particularly wrong with discovering an article of clothing and a pair of boots, but as Zhang Quan unraveled the Article, immediately his face turned ashen. That's because the clothing was very large and the pair of boots were much larger than Jiang Quan's size. The Jiang family men were of the literary aristocracy and were of a smaller stature, but this article of clothing was obviously prepared for someone both robust and sturdy. It wouldn't even fit Jiang Chao or Jiang Xinji. Moreover, there weren't any other men within the fu. On top of that, in a hidden part of the collar of the outfit was an embroidery of twin lotus on one stalk comma. Being Dilian. Lit. Twin lotus flowers on one stalk / figure, a symbol of a devoted married couple. Since the symbol was in a hidden spot, it would not be seen when worn, but for this piece of clothing to appear now, it caused Jiang Quan to feel a great deal of humiliation and shame. Absolutely livid, he threw the items into Xia Yan's face. Slut. Xia Yan was stupefied, and upon closer inspection, her face paled in fright. Hurriedly she beseeched, "Master, this concubine has never done such a thing. Master, this is all slander and defamation from Ruaner. Mother surely knows how to jest." Zhang Ruan placidly responded, "Since mother was found to be pregnant, you have insisted on not being disturbed, so Ruan Yang had not taken a single step into Yanhua Yuan. What's more, I have been standing right here along with father, so how can mother say I slandered and framed you? Furthermore, I'd like to ask mother, what type of method could I have employed to be able to hide something like this in your personal chambers under your watchful eyes?" Then, as if she thought of something else, she smiled and added, "Moreover, in regards to mother's distinctive embroidery work, I'm sure father is most knowledgeable and should be able to distinguish it at a glance. Unless father is not able to recognize it?" By now Jiang Quan was fuming so much his whole body was trembling. His own wife's handiwork, obviously. He was most familiar with it. From the moment he laid eyes on that article of clothing and boots, he was able to ascertain that it was indeed the handiwork of Xia Yan. No matter how much he usually was partial towards Xia Yan, generally overlooking her meager treatment of Jiang Ruan, no man could remain indifferent when he was made aware of how his wife had cuckolded him. Jiang Quan was totally resentful and enraged towards Xia Yan. Where could there be any of his usual tenderness towards her anymore? Upon seeing the spectacle, Xia Chang glowered at Jiang Ruan. "What kind of underhanded actions have you done?" Jiang Su also fell to her knees in tears. "Father, you should be clear on what kind of a person mother is, so how can you suspect her?" Jiang Quan looked down at his most beloved daughter. For 3 years she had lived a Spartan and destitute life at the ancestral temple, and he felt some remorse towards her. Also, since Jiang Su's return, she had become more sensible, obedient and well-behaved. Watching her pitiful cries caused his heart to soften. However, once Jiang Ruan had undertaken a task, she would not leave anyone any leeway. She cast a look towards Tianju, and Tianju continued indifferently, "Second miss, the servants have also uncovered some suspicious items from your courtyard." Lin Lang's face became even more white, almost as if she would faint right away. Jiang Su knitted her brows as Tianju took a cloth bag from the guards and threw it before everyone. The thing in the cloth bag seemed to be stained with blood, and a heavy fishy scent arose. Since Tianju had thrown down the bag, the cloth bag had unraveled and whatever was in it fell out. It was a blood-coated clump of flesh, and the sight was quite nauseating for those watching. "What is this?" Xia Yan was startled, somehow finding that piece of cloth somewhat familiar. "A dead fetus." Tianju was by virtue a killer, so she answered with an air of icy detachment. Additionally, once she spoke such eerie words, cold silence descended upon the room and a chill entered everyone's heart. Jiang Ruan smiled. "Mother, at this point are you still going to persist in saying that Ruan Yang deliberately pushed you? Isn't it obvious that you took a medication for abortion a while ago, then hid our little brother in second sister's courtyard, and have now turned around to incriminate me? What nonsense are you spouting?" Xia Yin began to get frantic, as she had no idea how this thing had come to be. Impatiently she questioned Su, what in the world is this? What's happening here? A hint of agitation flashed past Jiang Susu's eyes. She had not expected Jiang Ruan to repeatedly torment and vex her, even to the point of discovering this matter. Yet, in front of Xian Li, Jiang Susu could only delicately reply, "Mother, this is a placenta." Sun Yang learned that partaking of an infant's placenta was beneficial in maintaining a youthful appearance. Moreover, you also know how I fell off the cliff. However, this is definitely not our little brother, as Sun Yang bought it from a medical store. A placenta? Shunro covered her mouth, her expression shifting as she looked upon Jiang Susu. A placenta was such a bloody item, it was unthinkable that this weak and feeble niece could stomach ingesting such a nauseating thing. Jiang Quan was also quite disappointed. The Jiang Susu in his heart was like a pure and honest fairy seated high above all others. She was his pride and joy, but right now she had utterly trampled and discredited his reputation. Xian Li's expression was also slightly disfavorable, whereas Jiang Susu became aggravated, but could only pretend to be aggrieved. "Master, you've heard it. Right, this is a placenta but not my stillborn." Xia Yin quickly tried to explain while catching a glimpse of Lin Lang's sheet white appearance. Why was Lin Lang so frightened, as if she was going to collapse from severe oppression? Xia Yin suspiciously paused as a terrifying notion flashed through her mind. No, that's impossible. She once again perused that cloth bag, that familiar-looking brown material. It was almost identical to the material used by Lin Lang to remove the fetus after she had miscarried. Xia Yin let out a blood-curdling screech, causing everyone in the house to startle in fright. She collapsed and imploded within as she tugged on her hair. "It can't be, it can't be, it can't be. Mother, what's wrong?" Jiang Susu became overwrought as she took in the situation and rushed to support Xia Yin up. Xia Yin had not known where she found the strength to shove aside Jiang Susu while retreating a few steps, looking as if she had seen the devil himself. "Mother, what's wrong?" "It's me, Susu." Jiang Susu was rather upset with Xia Yin for behaving in such a manner in front of Xian Li. Xia Yin yet again collapsed and started tugging on her hair in anguish. Jiang Susu ate infant placenta. A sister had eaten the placenta that belonged to her brother. If this matter were to be spoken aloud, it would be the pinnacle of absurdity and cause people's blood to run cold. Yet, against all odds, it had happened. Jiang Ruan's lips slightly lifted at the corners. This was her goal. Xia Yin had spent her life lavishing Jiang Susu with her love, but to come to the realization that the child of her womb had become the placenta that her daughter had purchased from the medical store, it would become her very own nightmare. There is retribution for good and evil. It's the way of the heavens. Suddenly, Xia Yin went berserk, and while everyone was trying to make heads or tails of the proceedings, a middle-aged man ran in. On his back was a medicine sachet, and as he rushed in enraged, even the servants at the door were not able to hold him back. When he spotted Xia Yin, he began to rain curses. "You black-hearted woman, you thought you could make a fool out of me, attempting to hoodwink me with those lead-coated fake pieces of silver. Out of the question. You will have to accompany me to see the magistrate." Lu Zhu blinked and immediately went up to restrain the person, asking, "Excuse me, mister. Why are you tugging at our foreign pay?" The man was in a towering rage. This person miscarried a few days ago, and it was I who came to help her deliver. She told me not to divulge a single word about what had transpired, and had even given me a huge sum of silver for my silence. However, when I was on my way home, I stopped over at a shop to buy some things, only to realize that the silver was actually fake. Utter drivel. Jiang Susu raged. "Who bribed you to slander my mother? Be careful, or else I'll drag you before the magistrate for a hearing." Humph. The man was not that easily handled as he continued with a sneer. You still won't believe me then? You can head into the capital's Baoji Hall. At that time it was I who prescribed medication for this woman, and there are some particular herbs that are only available at Baoji Hall. Baoji Hall also keeps a record of all the sales and purchases made. You can go verify that. There. Then we will know who is actually a liar. Baoji Hall was the largest medical store in the capital, and their business ethos was based on honesty and integrity, otherwise it was synonymous with destroying the business reputation. Thus there was no subterfuge or dishonesty. If Xia Yan had indeed obtained a prescription for medication required after suffering a miscarriage, then this would definitely be found in Baoji Hall's record. That man, still unable to vent his anger, was about to drag Xia Yan, who was sitting on the ground. You woman, hurry and go with me to the magistrate. However, currently, Xia Yan was in a state of insanity and dazed, thus there was no way to even have an argument with her. That's enough. Jiang Quan finally bellowed out furiously, his eyes bloodshot, and both his cheeks trembling. Obviously he was overwrought. This had confirmed the fact that Xia Yan had already lost the baby some time back. Moreover, in his heart he could bet that the baby belonged to the owner of that piece of clothing. However, he would not be able to get an answer out of Xia Yan in her current state of mind. In a frosty tone he instructed, support and escort Foreign back into the room and keep a tight watch over her. This was ultimately a house arrest for Xia Yan. Xia Cheng could not have imagined this outcome of today's visit and looked askance at Xian Li before trailing after Jiang Quan, son-in-law, regarding this. Now that the show had come to a close, Shun Ro and Xia Jiao had no reason to stay any longer. Xia Jiao was totally disappointed to not be able to see the fall of Zhang Ruan. However, Zhang Li and Second Yinyang were still rather pleased at the outcome. They had been with Jiang Quan for so many years, and were well aware that this time it was almost impossible for Xia Yan to turn the tide and return to her former position. Hong Ying wanted to comfort and console Jiang Quan, so naturally she would no longer remain in the hall. For a moment, all who remained in the hall were Zhang Ruan and Jiang Susu. Jiang Susu stepped towards Zhang Ruan with a somber expression. Today, this was yet another one of your brilliant works. De Jeje's machinations are indeed ingenious. Second, sister, aren't you even a tad bit curious as to why mother has suddenly lost her mind? Suddenly Zhang Ruan's quiet gaze fell upon her, asking. Jiang Susu was taken aback. What? Jiang Ruan smiled slightly, and there was a strange vibe that Jiang Susu beheld in that smile, only to see Zhang Ruan looking towards that bloodied clump of flesh and softly say, because that placenta was in actual fact the very same one that mother personally discarded. Chapter 113. 1 Confidential Matters, Part 1. Chapter 113 Confidential Matters, Part 1. A whirlwind of chaos descended, yet it was the instigator who suffered in the end. Inside Ruanju, Lian Xiaotsket and commented, she had it coming. Such a vicious heart, trying to slander our Mississippi. Let's see her try to wriggle out of it now. Bai Ji, who was applying medicine to the wound on Zhang Ruan's face, was very distressed. The slap mark seemed to have become redder and stood out starkly against her pale skin. Master was too harsh. Miss is still this family's daughter no matter what. How could he punish her like this with outsiders present, and even use this much force? Bai Ji and Lian Xiao finally understood that Jiang Quan probably never took Zhang Ruan as his own daughter, so her tone inevitably contained reproach and anger. Tianju watched from the side. As a martial artist, she naturally knew just how powerful the slap Zhang Ruan suffered was. She couldn't help pondering over this matter. It was the first time she had personally witnessed Jiang Quan's cold treatment of Zhang Ruan. There really weren't many blood-related fathers who would use such a heavy hand in the world. Zhang Ruan, seeing Tianju in a daze, said to Bai Ji, "Go give Tianju some medicine too." Tianju had taken one of Jiang Quan's slaps for her, and it wasn't a light one either. Tianzhu replied. There's no need, this subordinate is a servant. If outsiders find out that this subordinate's face heals too quickly, they'll become suspicious. Zhang Ruan thought for a bit, then acceded. You won't have suffered this in vain. Tianzhu said nothing. The night passed. The next day, Lu Zhu brought news from outside that Zhang Quan had sent people to investigate Baoji Hall. As the middle-aged physician had said, Xia Yan sent a personal maid to Baoji Hall for herbs which were all for nursing the body after an abortion. Furious, Zhang Quan immediately ordered Lin Lang and Fei Chui caught and interrogated them about Xia Yan's affair. Of course, the two girls couldn't answer, so in his anger Zhang Quan had the two executed then thrown into mass graves. Lin Lang and Fei Chui were such high-ranking maids in the Jiangfu. Yet they ended up with such a terrible outcome. No one was safe. Zhang Quan angrily rounded up all the maids and servants in Yanhua Yuan, then tortured them until they confessed. For those who couldn't withstand it, they reported that he was a traveler who'd already left the capital. This cemented the fact that Xia Yan had an affair, making Zhang Quan immediately demand for a divorce. Zhang Susu knelt outside his study for an entire night in Zhangchao. Upon hearing of it, hurriedly invited Xian Li to intercede. The Xia family also felt that they had lost face, but ultimately it was Xia Yan who bound the Jiang and Xia families together. After discussing it, Zhang Quan finally relented on divorcing Xia Yan, but this didn't mean he let her go. He set up a small Buddhist hall inside the residence and forced Xia Yan to dwell there to read scriptures all day, telling others she'd converted to Buddhism. Since then the Jiangfu changed drastically, and everyone knew that Xia Yan had lost Zhang Quan's favor and all her power. Everyone in the residence with a bit of foresight began to subtly show support for fifth Yinyang Hong Ying. Some were also optimistic about second Yinyang, so they circled around the Zhangli mother and daughter pair. Though Hong Ying was young, beautiful and received Zhang Quan's doting, unfortunately she had no children and her status was too low. On the other hand, second Yinyang not only had her maternal family support but also a daughter with Zhang Quan. The network of power within the Jiangfu soon became bewildering. Lu Zhu sneered as she brushed Zhang Ruan's hair and commented, I don't know why there are so many stupid people in the Fu, all going around sucking up to those people. If you ask me, they should pay attention to Mississippi. Our Miss is not only the Fu's rightful master, but also a Junju who was conferred the title by the Empress Dowager herself. How could a troublesome concubine even compare? Zhang Ruan glanced at her. If that's the case, then you're the smartest here? Smiling awkwardly, Lu Zhu replied, this servant didn't mean that, but those people are really stupid. I just can't stand by idly and watch. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. The reason everyone in the Fu fawned over fifth Yinyang and second Yinyang, and not the eldest D daughter, was actually very simple. It was because Zhang Quan so clearly showed his disdain towards her that the servants could tell. For a daughter who was reviled by her own father, what kind of future could she have? When Lu Zhu finished brushing her hair and inserted the last hairpin, Zhang Ruan stood. Let's go, it's time to visit mother. The news that Xia Yan had lost power spread to Zhang Ruan, so naturally the pure-hearted Zhang Dan knew of it too. A maid said, I didn't expect Foreign to end up like this. Zhang Dan supported her chin with a hand as she gazed out of the window. Compared to her immature form 3 years ago, she now showed hints of a young lady's unique charm. At a glance, she was different from the enchanting Zhang Ruan and Zhang Susu's delicate beauty, herself being more gentle and well-behaved. Only, her current expression was slightly gloomy, not at all like her usually timid look. Wanting to scheme against Zhang Ruan, yet the brain is so stupid, she ridiculed. The maid immediately fell silent. In the past 3 years, her young miss had turned moody and unpredictable, as if she had grown up 10 years overnight. Sometimes even her closest maids would get chills at the look in her eyes. It's such a pity. A big mess like this only pulled down Zhang Furen. Zhang Dan's tone was cold. Why couldn't it also implicate Zhang Ruan? How good it would be if she died too. The maid, shocked, hurriedly looked down at her toes. She fervently wished to disappear from the room. Zhang Dan caught her movement from the corner of her eye. Her lips twisted into a sarcastic smile before she turned away to look at the banana tree outside. Miss, please take care. Qing Ting carefully patted Zhang Susu on the back, who was currently digging into her own throat to induce vomiting. Ever since the day of Xia Yan's incident, Jiang Susu vomited everything she ate. If she didn't know the inside story, even the maid would think Jiang Susu was the one who got pregnant. Jiang Susu roughly pushed Qing Ting away and covered her mouth with a handkerchief. "Get out!" Qing Ting could only retreat with the silver plate. Jiang Susu supported herself with a chair, feeling as if her stomach roiled like a storm. She couldn't escape Zhang Ruan's words from that day, because that placenta was in actual fact the very same one that mother personally discarded. Only when one understood Zhang Ruan's meaning would you know how scary those words were. Jiang Susu hated that she couldn't scrape out her stomach. As soon as she remembered what she voluntarily ate, she would vomit without pause. Since that by asterisks who dared to bring back such a placenta, Jiang Susu tortured her severely before throwing her out of the fu. It was naturally impossible to keep anyone who did something like that to her. Jiang Susu woke screaming from nightmares every night, sweaty and anxious. When she looked into a bronze mirror, her previously beautiful face had become extremely haggard. By asterisks, she hurled the mirror to the ground with furrowed brows. The Jiangfu supposedly built a new Buddhist hall, but in reality it was just an old and dilapidated black shack. Located in the most remote corner of the fu, its courtyard was covered in debris from construction, and had only a single dry well with some dead tree stumps. It looked exceedingly gloomy, as if it was never touched by sunlight. Two weather-beaten, elderly female servants stood guard at the door. They chatted as they cracked melon seeds. Perhaps they were talking about the person inside the small Buddhist hall because they occasionally turned around to look back with contempt. It was this scene which greeted Zhang Ruan when she arrived with Tianzhu and Baiji in tow. When the two servants saw Zhang Ruan, they stood and bowed in such a hurry that they couldn't even care to tidy the melon seeds. The events of a few days ago had long caused the servants to boil over. Xia Yan was the one who wanted to seize an opportunity, yet she was defeated so handily by the normally unobtrusive eldest daughter. They weren't blind, especially towards their masters. It was clear that eldest Miss skills were on a completely different level to Furin's. Seeing as Zhang Ruan was also very favored by the Empress Dowager, it would be a piece of cake for her to deal with a servant. In this way, even if everyone knew Zhang Quan disliked this daughter of his, they still didn't dare to take her lightly and were carefully respectful towards her. Zhang Ruan gave a small smile and waved her hand. "I came to see mother." Baiji stepped forwards and stuffed two pouches full of silver into the elderly female servant's hands. The two silently weighed the pouches, then smiles soon bloomed on their faces. "Eldest Miss doesn't need to be so polite. If you want to visit you need only ask. This old servant will open the door for eldest Mississippi." Saying so, she took an iron key from around her neck and opened the door. Only then did they notice that the door was barred by a shaft of iron and bolted from the outside. It was all to lock Xia Yan up tight. After the two servants had opened the door, they stepped aside to let Zhang Ruan and Tianzhu and while Baiji stood guard outside. The servants, self-aware, also walked away for a distance until they couldn't hear anything from the people inside. The room was dark with only a single small window, but even the window was boarded up tightly. The place was more or less empty. Xia Yan had long heard Zhang Ruan's voice through the window, but she stubbornly pretended she didn't exist. Tianzhu lit the lamps, brightening the room. There was only a wooden bed with a filthy and damp blanket, a wooden table, a rattan cushion, an altar for offerings, and a guanyin statue made of clay. Xia Yan knelt on the rattan cushion with her eyes closed as if she was sincerely praying. Guanyin, the Buddhist bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, associated with compassion. Zhang Ruan sat on the only seat before the wooden table and took in her surroundings. It seemed as if Zhang Quan was truly furious with Xia Yan this time, as this place wasn't much different from her home in the rural residence. Such was the wheel of fortune. When Xia Yan instructed Zhang Lan's family to take care of Zhang Ruan back then, she couldn't have imagined she would one day fall into the same dire straits. Xia Yan's legs were already numb from kneeling and her knees were both painful and itchy. The room was damp and poorly ventilated. When it rained, the chill would easily seep into the bones, and in just a matter of days she had developed rheumatism. But Zhang Quan had issued a death penalty forbidding anyone from visiting her. However, this day had finally ushered in a visitor. But it was the one person who was a thorn in her side, Jiang Ruan. Chapter 113. 2 Confidential Matters, Part 2. Chapter 113 Confidential Matters, Part 2. Originally Xia Yan planned to ignore Jiang Ruan, but she was just too calm, sitting there not saying a word. Meanwhile, Xia Yan was kneeling and her knees were really too uncomfortable. Thus, she could only open her eyes and ask flatly, "Why are you here?" Jiang Ruan looked at her with a smile. 3 days makes a big difference. Mother has only been in seclusion for a few days, yet you already show hints of the Buddha's benevolent aura, with a mind as pure as the spring breeze. Xia Yan's anger flared. She wanted so hard to be the same unparalleled woman she once was, but looking down, her filthy clothes were stained with oil and dirt. And because she couldn't take a bath every day as before, her whole body emanated a foul stench. The long hair she was so proud of was now a chaotic mess, and was even full of knots. As for her appearance, Xia Yan didn't need to open her eyes to know how hideous she looked. In front of Jiang Ruan's cold smile, Xia Yan felt as if she was stripped naked and thrown into the market for people to gawk at. How could she accept this? She looked up at Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan wore an elegant pink dress embroidered in gold, with skin white as snow, lips red as blood, and hair black as ebony. Even in such a dark room, her body seemed to emit a brilliant glow. Though she was sitting on a simple wooden stool, it seemed as if she sat upon the most honorable seat in the world. And with her smiling gaze upon her, it felt as though she was looking at a mere ant struggling in the dust, her glance full of mockery. Xia Yan trembled all over. The more captivating Jiang Ruan was, the more shameful she became. This moment reminded her of the scene when she first met Zhao Mei a long time ago. Many years ago, Xia Yan was the most talented woman in the capital. No one could beat her in poetry or painting. She was without equal in both chess and zither. Men were enamored with her and women were jealous. But she still couldn't marry into a good family just because her father was a Shu son, so her status was too low. Those noblemen could marry her as a concubine, but never a wife. What a beautiful woman feared was not her twilight, when her hair turned gray, but rather to never realize her full potential. The young Xia Yan had her nose in the sky and set her heart on raising her status through marriage. At this time she met Jiang Quan. He was a new official at court, elegant and handsome. She loved him, but the one who married him in the end was not her. Xia Yan once saw Zhao Mei from a distance, just after Jiang Quan mentioned the matter of his marriage to the Zhao family's beloved treasure. Xia Yan secretly went to the doors of the General Fu and saw a girl with a carefree grin. Clad in a set of red hunting clothes, she carried a pure and untainted smile in her eyes. It was obvious from the doting way her father and brothers looked at her that she grew up coddled as the jewel of the family. An extremely complicated feeling arose in Xia Yan. She thought, why can others get all they want without effort, while I can only dream of it? She was jealous, so jealous that she went crazy. She thought, if only I could let this beloved little miss experience the feeling of struggling in the dust as I do. To drag her into the quagmire, never to see the light. To see her slowly lose that carefree smile and wither away, witness all the most wretched and vicious things in the world, then let her crawl under my feet and weep. That was the day Xia Yan changed her mind. She would enter the Jiangfu to be a concubine, if only to stain that bright and pure soul with mud. In the end she did succeed. Zhao Mei entered the Fu, fell out of favor, was bullied by servants, and her children were never loved by Jiang Quan. When Zhao Mei died, Xia Yan thought she'd finished her forever. Who knew that now, when she looked at Jiang Ruan in red sitting in the dark, what she saw wasn't the clean smile of that year but mockery, as if laughing at a jumping clown who had overestimated her capabilities. Xia Yan screamed and leapt at Jiang Ruan, hands outstretched to claw at her face. But Tianzhu, one step faster, simply kicked her knee in. Xia Yan abruptly fell onto her knees in front of Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan looked at her and asked lightly, Jiang Foreign, how does it feel to fall into hell? After a pause, Xia Yan began laughing madly. She pointed at Jiang Ruan's nose. By asterisk, you're just like your shameless mother. Tianzhu slapped her across the face with a sharp paw. Zhang Ruan gently wiped her hands, then looked at the dumbfounded Xia Yan with a smile. Be careful of your words, mother. Huatsong ko chu. Troubles issue from the mouth. A loose tongue may cause a lot of trouble. Xia Yan, gritting her teeth, chuckled under her breath. Going for broke, she said. You're already angry? It seems like you're very protective of your short-lived mother, little whore. But what a pity you didn't see the way she cried and begged me to let you and your brother off. Tsk, so ugly. Zhang Ruan's eyes moved slightly, but she didn't speak, so Xia Yan continued. Humph, you don't know how your mother died, right? Back then her body wasn't well. I even persuaded Master to take care of her a bit more, so he ordered the kitchen to make medicinal tonics for her. That by asterisks, it gulped it down as soon as she heard it was from Master, but didn't know she was actually drinking poison. A strange smile warped Xia Yan's face. But it could never be traced to me because I wasn't the one to poison it. Guess who did it? Despite how this caught her attention, Zhang Ruan's expression remained calm. Xia Yan burst into laughter, as if thinking of something especially funny. It was Zhang Dan. Ha ha ha, I only had people threaten her with a few words, and she was scared into poisoning Zhao Mei's bowl every day. Wasn't Zhao Mei very kind throughout her life, but she didn't know she raised a white-eyed wolf. But later I found something very interesting. Zhang Dan also gave you poison. She laughed again. All because I told her that Zhao Mei's care for her was only superficial. You're Zhao Mei's biological daughter. Therefore she could never treat her the same as you. Then if you died, Zhang Xing would only have her as a sister, and Zhao Mei would truly take her as her own daughter. After she heard this, Zhang Dan would find opportunities to poison your drinks every day. Ha ha ha. Zhang Dan is the most cruel one in this whole fu. You guys treated her so well, yet she repaid you with death. Aren't you disappointed, aren't you sad? Tianzhu glanced at Zhang Ruan in surprise, but Zhang Ruan acted as if she hadn't heard a word. She only mildly replied, Thank you, Zhang Furen. Turns out there was such a story. Xia Yan laughed in defeat. Now that I'm like this, I might as well admit my loss. It's not like I can escape from here. But you? That by asterisk, Zhao Mei has already gone to hell. Master hates you. And sooner or later you and your damned brother won't end well. There's plenty in the fu who want you dead. Be careful that when you go to hell, you won't even know who did it. Zhang Ruan looked amused. What does it matter to Zhang Furen if I go to hell? But I know very well when Zhang Furen will go to hell. Xia Yan was startled and stared warily at Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan sighed. Zhang Furen thought that there was a little hope after you entered this small Buddhist hall. However, I'm afraid that all your wishes and hopes have been misplaced on second sister and second brother. Think clearly, if mother's matters were spread to outsiders, how would second sister and second brother raise their heads in the capital? Could they have a good future? Xia Yan's body trembled. Yes, if everyone knew she tried to harm the daughter, how would Jiang Chao's peers see him? Who would be willing to marry Jiang Susu? Xia Yan couldn't be more clear on how important a mother's reputation was for the child. She suddenly raised her head. How would outsiders know? Master won't allow it, she shouted. With how much Jiang Quan loved this daughter and son pair, there was no way he'd air his dirty laundry outside. There would be nowhere to hide if it spread out. Zhang Ruan's smile became gentler. There are so many mouths, it's impossible to have an impenetrable wall. How can Zhang Furen be so sure that nothing will escape? It's you. It's you. Xia Yan looked at Zhang Ruan as if she were a ghost. You want to hurt them. The one who hurt them was you, not me, Zhang Ruan said, one word at a time. Xia Yan rushed to Zhang Ruan's feet and began to kowtow unceasingly. I'm begging you. Don't hurt them. Please save them. They're still your brother and sister. It's all my fault. I deserve all your resentment. They have nothing to do with it. Xia Yan bowed dozens of times, but Zhang Ruan was unmoved. Finally, she raised her head with a trace of determination in her eyes, sneering, If you really want to tell everyone, then go tell them. Is Zhang Furen thinking of taking her own life? Zhang Ruan asked softly. Xia Yan looked at her in horror. Yes, she wanted to. If Zhang Ruan really spread the news, she could use her death to block those people's mouths from talking about Jiang Susu and Jiang Chao. She was already ruined, and only wished for Jiang Susu and Jiang Chao to live comfortably for the rest of their days. But who knew that Zhang Ruan, like a roundworm in her belly, saw through her with only a few words? Zhang Ruan laughed. Zhang Foran loves her children very much. It's really touching. However, do they think the same way? She leaned down and stared into Xia Yan's eyes. I think second sister and second brother would be ashamed and angry to have a mother like this. If Zhang Foran fails to end it on your own, they'll definitely try to erase Zhang Foran's existence, because you are an unneeded stain upon their lives. She grinned at Xia Yan's horrified expression. Zhang Foran should feel very sad when your two children come to get rid of you. I just don't know who will move first. Will it be second sister or second brother? She straightened, then glanced at Xia Yan lightly and said with a cold tone, Don't worry, Zhang Foran, I won't let you die so easily. Your life isn't mine to take. Your own flesh and blood will do the deed. Her words carried a peculiar air, like an enchantment beckoning people to the doors of hell. She continued faintly, This Junju has a vicious heart. How can I miss out on watching such a play? The red skirt fluttered across the ground. The hall's doors once again closed with a pa, and the room was filled with the sounds of someone breaking down. Zhang Ruan looked up and coldly ordered the two female servants outside the door. Guard closely, don't let her die. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.